10 Fates in Warhammer 40K Worse Than Death. In the grim darkness of the far future, death is a kindness. The lucky ones die quickly, a bolt around to the skull, a last beam through the heart. One moment of searing pain, then nothing, oblivion, peace. But the unlucky, the truly cursed, they beg for an ending that never comes. Today, we're exploring 10 fates so horrifying, so cosmically cruel, that death itself would be a gift, a mercy denied to billions across the galaxy. These are torments that make execution look like a vacation. Look at that image. Really look at it. A space marine, one of the Emperor's finest warriors, suspended in glowing blue stasis energy. His face frozen in eternal rage. His consciousness trapped in a Gothic stone chamber while centuries crawl past like wounded animals. He cannot move, cannot fight, cannot die. He is aware of every passing second, every minute, every year, every millennium, and there is nothing he can do about it. What could possibly be worse than being an immortal demigod warrior locked in your own body, screaming inside a prison of frozen time? Plenty, as it turns out. See, other fictional universes have villains who kill. The Warhammer 40,000 universe has perfected the art of making victims wish for death. The Chaos gods don't want souls destroyed. Destruction ends the suffering. They want souls suffering eternally, feeding them with an endless banquet of anguish. The Imperium doesn't just execute heretics, it makes examples that echo through generations, warnings carved in living flesh. Even the alien races have developed torments that defy comprehension, violations of body and soul that human language lacks the vocabulary to describe. What we're going to examine today are 10 distinct fates, escalating in horror, each one worse than the last. These aren't just painful deaths, these are eternal sentences, conscious torments. Existential horrors that strip away everything that makes existence bearable while refusing the release of oblivion. Now, some of you might think you've heard of these fates before. You've skimmed the wiki articles, you've seen the memes. You know about servitors and chaos spawn and the golden throne. But I promise you, we're going deeper than surface-level descriptions today. We're exploring the psychological, spiritual, and physical dimensions of each torment. We're examining personal accounts from the lore of those who've experienced these nightmares firsthand. We're answering the question that really matters. What does it actually feel like to suffer these fates? Understanding these horrors isn't just morbid curiosity. It reveals the fundamental nature of the 40K universe. This is a cosmos where hope is the cruelest joke, where the gods themselves feed on suffering like parasites gorging on an open wound, where the greatest warriors in human history can be reduced to screaming, helpless victims for eternity. The universe has rules, physical laws, mathematical constants. And in the 41st millennium, one of those constants is this: there is always a fate worse than death. There is always a deeper pit. There is always another layer of hell waiting beneath the one you thought was the bottom. The warp responds to emotion and intent. Suffering isn't just a byproduct of this universe. It's a resource, a currency, a form of worship. The cosmos has essentially evolved to maximize conscious torment because that torment feeds the very gods who shape reality. It's a closed loop of horror with no exit door. So, buckle in. We're starting with fates that are merely nightmarish and working our way up to torments that will make you grateful for every mundane annoyance in your life. By the time we reach number 1, you'll understand why in the grim darkness of the far future, the dead are the lucky ones. Before we can even begin our countdown, we have to establish a framework. We need to build a scale to measure misery, because in the 41st millennium, suffering is a science. To understand why these fates are worse than death, you have to understand what death actually is in this universe, and it is not an ending. When a person dies, their soul, their consciousness, their essential self doesn't just wink out of existence. It detaches from the corpse and is cast adrift into the Imperium, the warp. Imagine the raw, terrified essence of who you are, suddenly naked and alone, floating in a psychic ocean filled with sharks the size of planets. These entities, these daemons, are drawn to the light of a soul like predators to blood in the water. For most of humanity's uncounted trillions, death is simply a brief, terrifying moment of awareness before their soul is torn apart and consumed. It's a horrible, violent transition, but it is, at least, a transition that ends. This reality creates a hierarchy of suffering. At the very bottom, the most merciful fate is a quick death. A single moment of pain, followed by the chaos of the warp, and then, mercifully, nothing. Above that, you have a slow, agonizing death. Torture, disease, being eaten alive by a tyrannid. It's infinitely worse, but it still has a finish line. Your body fails, your soul is released, and the suffering, at least in this mortal realm, is over. Higher still is a fate some heretics and Xenos weapons can inflict: true soul destruction, utter annihilation, oblivion, the complete erasure of your existence on every level. To many in the 41st millennium, this is a terrifying concept. But for those who understand the alternatives, oblivion is a luxury. It is an escape, a guarantee that the suffering will not and cannot continue. But at the very peak of this pyramid of pain, sitting above it all, are the fates we will explore today. These are the sentences that deny you even the release of oblivion. These are the torments of continued existence without death's mercy. The architects of these fates, whether they be the cold calculus of the Imperium or the gleeful malice of chaos, understand a fundamental truth about the human mind. A person can endure almost anything if they know it will end. A marathon runner can push their body through unimaginable agony because they can visualize the finish line. A prisoner of war can survive years of torment by clinging to the knowledge that their body will eventually fail, that their heart will one day stop. The mind is a fortress built on a single critical foundation, the promise of an ending. But what happens when you remove that foundation? What happens when the race has no finish line? When the torture is designed to never, ever stop? The mind doesn't just get tired, it doesn't just break. It unravels in ways that physical torment alone can never achieve. It is the horror of the infinite. And the Warhammer 40,000 universe is uniquely, exquisitely designed to generate this specific brand of horror. The warp, that chaotic dimension of psychic energy, doesn't just exist alongside reality, it responds to it. It feeds on strong emotion, and no emotion is stronger or more sustaining than pure, conscious suffering. This means that torment isn't just a byproduct of war and cruelty. It's a resource. It is a currency. It is a form of prayer that strengthens the very gods who demand it. The universe itself has a vested interest in your pain. It is a self-perpetuating, closed-loop engine of horror, and there is no exit. So as we go through this list, remember that framework. Each fate is a masterpiece of misery, judged not just by the physical pain it inflicts, but by its psychological and spiritual devastation. We're about to descend into the deepest pits of a universe built on despair. Let's begin. And so, our countdown begins. At number 10, we have a fate that, on the surface, might seem almost reasonable by the standards of this universe: service in an Imperial Penal Legion. But don't be fooled. This isn't just a death sentence. A death sentence is a mercy. A penal legion sentence is a guarantee of suffering where death is the prize, a prize dangled just out of reach, often for years, by the uncaring fist of the Imperium. Who ends up here? The list is long and not particularly discerning. Of course, you have your deserters, your cowards, your traitors who committed heresies just minor enough to avoid a summary execution. But you also have political prisoners, inconvenient journalists, and guild workers who went on strike at the wrong time. And then you have the truly unlucky, the billions of souls who were simply in the wrong hab block on the wrong day when the planetary governor needed to fill a quota for the Departamento Munitorum. The Imperium's bureaucracy is a vast, grinding machine, and it has no mechanism for determining guilt or innocence. It only has quotas. It only has numbers. You can be a decorated veteran of a dozen campaigns, but if you look at a commissar the wrong way, you can find yourself condemned, your life service erased in an instant. Imagine you are one of them. Stripped of your name, given a number, and shoved into a uniform that smells of fear and desperation. Your weapon is a lasgun that looks like it was last serviced during the Horus Heresy, its power pack prone to catastrophic failure at the worst possible moment. Your flak armor has more holes than plating, a symbolic gesture at best. The rations are a nutrient paste that tastes of chemical runoff and regret. You are then shipped off to a war zone so horrific, so utterly unwinnable, that even the famously stoic Imperial Guard refused the deployment. You are not there to win. You are there to die, to soak up enemy fire so that more valuable soldiers, the ones with functioning equipment and a full name, can advance over your corpse. You are human ammunition. But the true horror, the element that elevates this from a simple suicide mission to a genuine fate worse than death, is locked around your neck: the explosive collar. A simple device, really. A band of plasteel and wiring, with a small, potent charge linked to a remote detonator held by a commissar standing safely in the rear. And these commissars are not shy about using them. Did you fail to charge into that machine gun nest with sufficient enthusiasm? Detonation. Did you question the order to use your own body as a sandbag? Detonation. Did you trip and fall while the rest of your squad was advancing into a hail of shrapnel? You're slowing down the line. Detonation. The collar removes the one piece of agency a soldier in a hopeless situation has: the ability to choose the circumstances of their own end. You cannot make a heroic last stand. You cannot charge the enemy to get it over with. You must die on the commissar schedule, not your own. You must earn your death through either an impossible victory or by suffering just enough that your handler finally deems you expended. And some, the truly cursed, just can't seem to manage it. There are accounts from the lore of penal legionnaires who, through some cruel twist of fate or sheer dumb luck, survive. They survive dozens, even hundreds of meat grinder engagements. They watch every person they ever shared a ration with get blown to pieces, vaporized, or torn apart, while they somehow walk away with only new scars. For them, survival isn't a victory, it's a recurring nightmare. Each dawn brings not the hope of a new day, but the dread of having to endure another one, trapped in a cycle of purposeless violence, waiting for a release that never seems to come. The physical dangers of penal legion service, as horrific as they are, pale in comparison to the psychological torment that is deliberately engineered into the very fabric of the system. The Empire, in its 10,000-year history, has perfected the art of breaking a human being so completely that death becomes an abstract concept, a forgotten luxury. The explosive collar is not the primary weapon. The primary weapon is the Legionnaire's own mind, turned against itself. It begins with the systematic erasure of identity. You are stripped of your name, your history, your homeworld. You are given a number. You are no longer Jorik from the agro-world of Prosperine 4.
You are now Legionnaire 734 Alpha. This isn't just for administrative convenience, it's the first step in unmaking you.
Then comes the ignorance. Penal legionnaires are never told the strategic objectives of their mission. They are loaded onto landers, dropped onto a battlefield, and given a direction. They don't know if they're fighting to reclaim a holy city or to secure a promethium refinery. They don't know the name of the planet they're on. They don't know if their actions have any meaning whatsoever. They exist in a fog of purposeless violence, a state which modern psychological studies have shown is more corrosive to the human spirit than even the most extreme physical hardship. This purposelessness breeds a unique and vicious form of survivor's guilt. For the legionnaire who, by some miracle, survives their first, fifth, or 50th engagement, there is no relief. They look around the blood-soaked transport after a battle and see the empty seats where their squad mates once sat. They don't feel lucky, they feel cursed. Why them? Why are they still breathing when braver, better soldiers were torn to shreds? Was it cowardice? Did they hesitate for a microsecond while someone else charged forward? Did they subconsciously use a comrade as a shield? Many legionnaires become convinced that they are being specifically punished, that the emperor himself has singled them out to watch others find the emperor's peace while they remain trapped in the living hell of existence. This internal destruction is amplified by the brutal social engineering within the legions. The Muniterum deliberately mixes violent murderers and gang scum with political dissidents and the falsely accused. Trust becomes an impossibility. Every other legionnaire is a potential threat. The man sleeping in the bunk next to you might slit your throat for an extra ration bar. Yet if he does, you dying at his hands is considered desertion, and the commissar might detonate the collars of your entire unit as punishment for the failure. You are surrounded by thousands of people, yet you are utterly, terrifyingly alone. There are documented cases that illustrate the horrifying endpoint of this system. Inquisitorial archives speak of a penal legion, the Stray Dogs, that fought for 37 continuous years. They were rotated through 17 different war zones, from the toxic ash wastes of Armageddon to the jungle hells of Catachan. The unit's casualty rate was a staggering 99.7%, yet it was never fully wiped out. The handful of survivors, the ones who had seen everything and forgotten how to die, were simply passed from one conflict to the next. They were too battle-hardened and experienced to be killed easily, but too condemned to ever be granted release. An Ordo Hereticus agent recovered the journal of one of these veterans, a man who had been in the Legion for over 2 decades. His final, barely legible entry read, "I have forgotten what silence sounds like. I have forgotten what food tastes like. I have forgotten my own name. But I cannot forget that I am still alive." This raises the obvious, logical question: why? Why endure this? Why not simply run headlong into the enemy's guns and find the sweet release of a quick, clean death? Why not turn your own faulty lasgun on yourself? The answer is as simple as it is monstrous. The Imperium thought of that. The architects of the penal legions were not fools. They were masters of human psychology, and they anticipated and systematically dismantled every possible escape route, turning the very concept of death into another tool of control. The explosive collar locked around every legionnaire's neck is the most obvious deterrent, but its true function is far more insidious than simple execution. It is a leash. The commissars overseeing these units are trained to recognize the look of a death seeker in a soldier's eyes, that desperate, vacant stare that precedes a suicidal charge. They can see it from 100 meters away. A legionnaire running too eagerly toward the enemy, deliberately exposing themselves to fire, or attempting to tamper with their collar, doesn't receive the mercy of a quick detonation. Instead, the collar delivers a non-lethal but utterly incapacitating jolt of neuroagony. It's a pain so profound it can liquefy a person's sanity, leaving them a twitching, screaming wreck on the battlefield. A living object lesson to anyone else considering a similar escape. The message is clear. You don't get to choose your end. You die only when we are finished with you. But even that pales in comparison to the system's true masterstroke of cruelty. A piece of metaphysical blackmail so vile it could only have been conceived by the administratum. It is the concept of the inherited sentence. Within the vast, uncaring bureaucracy of the Imperium, a cosmic ledger is kept.
A penal legionnaire who dies before achieving a certain, often arbitrarily high number of worthy kills, or before serving a sufficient duration, has their sentence passed on. It is transferred to their next of kin. Imagine that. You are Legionnaire 734 Alpha. You finally see your chance, a charging orc knob, a moment of lapsed discipline from the commissar. You could end it. But in that final second, you remember your family back on your homeworld, your parents, your siblings, perhaps even your children. If you die now, in disgrace, with your debt to the Empire unpaid, they will receive the notice. A black-clad enforcer will arrive at their door, and your brother or your son will be taken to serve out the remainder of your sentence. Your death doesn't grant freedom. It condemns someone you love to the exact same hell. So you live, you fight, you kill, not for the Emperor, not for survival, but to protect your family from the consequences of your own death. You are trapped not by a collar, but by love. And finally, for the truly faithful, there is the spiritual poison. Service to the Emperor is meant to be a holy duty. A glorious death in his name is taught to be the ultimate goal, guaranteeing the soul's protection in the afterlife. But penal legionnaires do not die in glory. They die in disgrace, their sin literally branded around their necks. The ecclesiarchy teaches that the souls of the condemned, dying without redemption, are denied the Emperor's light. They are cast adrift in the nightmare of the warp, unprotected, to be torn apart by its denizens for eternity. For a devout citizen, this is the ultimate horror. Service in a penal legion doesn't just promise a miserable life and a painful death, it threatens to damn your immortal soul. And that is why penal legion service is only number 10 on our list. Because for all its engineered horrors, for all the systems designed to prolong the suffering, it does eventually end. The universe is a place of probabilities, and sooner or later, a stray bullet, a random artillery shell, or a simple biological failure will finally grant a legionnaire the release they crave. An ending does eventually arrive. The fates to come offer no such mathematical hope of conclusion. With the fate of the penal legionnaire, there is at least the cold comfort of probability. An end will come. But as we move to number 9 on our list, we leave the realm of prolonged death sentences and enter the domain of fundamental, horrifying transformation. We move from the administratum's cold calculus to the ecclesiarchy's fiery piety. This is the fate of the archoflagellant, a punishment reserved for those who have sinned against the imperial creed, but whose continued, agonizing existence can be repurposed to serve a higher, holier purpose. The process begins not with an executioner's blade, but with a chirurgeon's bone saw. The condemned individual, often a minor heretic, a blasphemer, or simply someone who questioned a priest's authority, is taken to a penatorium. They are not killed, they are remade. Strapped to an operating slab, fully conscious and aware, they are subjected to an ordeal of surgical reconstruction so profound it defies sanity. Their limbs are systematically amputated. They feel the grinding saw, the snap of bone, the searing pain as their arms and legs are severed from their torso. But they are not allowed the mercy of passing out. In place of their human limbs, the tech priests and flesh-smiths of the Ministorum graft on monstrous implements of war. Whirring, tooth-bladed chain scythes, crackling electro-flails that hiss with ozone, heavy piston-driven power scourges designed to pulp flesh and shatter armor. Their nervous system is meticulously rewired, not for healing, but for control. Any attempt at independent thought, any flicker of rebellion against their fate, is rerouted through their own brain to register as excruciating, soul-shattering pain. Their very will is weaponized against them. Their skull is opened, and control devices are implanted directly into their cerebral cortex, overriding all voluntary motor function. A network of chemical injectors is threaded through their torso, ready to flood their system with a cocktail of combat stimulants, pain blockers, and rage inducers on command. And here lies the true, insidious horror of arcoflagellation. The person is not erased. Their mind, their memories, their soul, it all remains, perfectly preserved. They are a passenger trapped within their own weaponized body. They are a ghost in their own machine, watching through their own eyes as their new, monstrous limbs twitch and flex, entirely outside of their control. They are aware of every single moment of their own desecration, and they are aware for every moment that follows. Throughout the entire agonizing procedure, priests of the ecclesiarchy are present, chanting litanies. They whisper that this is not a punishment, but a gift, a chance for redemption. They explain that every moment of suffering pays a tithe on their soul's debt, that every enemy they will kill in the Emperor's name is a step toward his divine forgiveness. The condemned is forced to listen to theological justifications for their own torture, a litany of holy purpose that only serves to sharpen the psychological torment. Their agony, they are told, is a beautiful offering. When the transformation is complete, they are no longer a person. They are a weapon, controlled by simple trigger phrases. In their dormant or pacified state, they are pumped full of sedatives, reducing them to a shambling, near catatonic stupor.
In this state, they are often chained in public squares or outside cathedrals, serving as living warnings against heresy. They can see the crowds that gather. They can see the looks of horror and pity on the faces of onlookers. They hear the whispers of parents telling their children what happens to those who stray from the Emperor's light. They can see it all, but they cannot move. They cannot speak. They cannot even blink without a command. They are a statue built of living, screaming meat, forced to simply witness. The core principle of arcoflagellation, the very thing that makes it so exquisitely cruel, is that it is not mindless. The ecclesiarchy could easily have the brain wiped, the personality scoured clean, turning the condemned into nothing more than a biological machine. That's what the Adeptus Mechanicus does with its servitors. But for the Ministorum, that would be a waste. Their theology is built on suffering, and for suffering to have spiritual value, for it to be a worthy offering to the God Emperor, it must be consciously experienced. The soul must be present to feel the torment, to witness its own debasement, and to understand on some level that this is its penance. The awareness is not a bug, it is the entire point. So, what happens when the trigger word is spoken? When the pacifying sedatives cease and the combat stimulants flood the arcoflagellant system? From the outside, it's a whirlwind of sanctified butchery. The flagellant becomes a blur of motion, its weapon limbs a thresher of steel and energy, tearing through heretics and xenos in a spray of blood and viscera. It roars, a sound that is half praise to the Emperor, half animal fury. But inside?
Inside that prison of flesh and steel, the original person is screaming. They watch in abject horror as their body, a thing that was once theirs to command, becomes an instrument of unrestrained slaughter. They feel the jarring impact as their chain scythe bites into flesh. They smell the coppery tang of blood and the acrid stench of burnt promethium. They see the faces of their victims, twisted in terror and agony in the split second before their own hands end them. And they can do nothing. They are a spectator to their own atrocities. Lore accounts, pieced together from fragmented confessions and inquisitorial studies, speak of the unique horror of recognition. An archoflagellant, unleashed upon a rioting hive city, might be forced to tear apart people they once knew. A former neighbor, a colleague from their old manufactorum. In some truly damned cases, they are forced to kill family members who were declared heretics alongside them, their own weaponized limbs becoming the instrument of their loved one's execution.
Perhaps the cruelest part of this entire nightmare is what ecclesiarchy records refer to as lucid aberrance, or the moment of clarity. It's a malfunction, a rare chemical misfire in the heat of battle. For a single, terrifying second, the stimulants fail. The pain-numbing agents wear off. The rage recedes. And the person inside is suddenly, briefly, back in control. They are no longer a passenger. They stand amidst a field of corpses they created. Their weapon limbs are dripping with gore. The overwhelming agony of their own mutilated body, momentarily masked, comes flooding back. In those few seconds, they see what they are. They remember who they were. And they scream. Not the roaring of a zealot, but the thin, terrified shriek of a soul recognizing its own damnation. Then the override systems engage. The injectors pump a fresh dose of chemicals into their veins. The scream of horror chokes, deepens, and transforms back into a battle cry.
The prison door slams shut, and the monster takes over once more. An archoflagellant's body can't sustain this forever. The constant flood of stimulants and the sheer physical trauma of combat burns them out, often within a few years. But burning out isn't death. It's just the body failing to keep up. A failed flagellant, its biological systems collapsing, is often simply recycled. Their still-aware consciousness, already shattered by years of helpless torment, is then lobotomized and repurposed into a servitor. The screaming soul is now trapped in an even more limited shell, perhaps doomed to spend the next century scrubbing corridors, its new prison a final, pathetic mockery of the warrior it was forced to become. Some, however, are deemed too valuable.
They are patched up, their organs replaced, their bodies held together by constant, agonizing surgical intervention, their minds stretched thin across decades of this living hell, a testament to the Imperium's boundless capacity for cruelty in the name of faith. But perhaps the deepest, most insidious horror of archoflagellation isn't the physical mutilation or the helpless awareness during slaughter. It's the theological framework that surrounds it, the spiritual gaslighting on an industrial scale that presents this nightmare not as a punishment but as a holy mercy. The ecclesiarchy, in its infinite and terrible wisdom, has perfected the art of making a victim grateful for their own torment. This isn't just about breaking the body, it's about hijacking the soul. Archoflagellants are not simply thrown into battle. They are required to participate in religious ceremonies. They attend mandatory, one-sided confessionals. Picture it. The flagellant, pacified by sedatives, stands immobile in a cold chapel, its weapon limbs chained and inert. A priest, his face a mask of pious sympathy, recounts the flagellant's sins to them. He doesn't shout. He speaks in a calm, reassuring tone, explaining how their current existence is a gift, how every moment of agony scours a stain from their soul,
How every heretic they are forced to kill is a prayer enacted in blood and bone, bringing them one step closer to the emperor's holy light. The condemned cannot argue, they cannot scream, they cannot even look away. They are forced to listen to the divine justification for their own damnation, a sermon that paints their prison as a paradise and their tormentor as their savior. For a true heretic, a cynical unbeliever, this might be just one more layer of absurdity. But many who end up as archoflagellants were not. They were faithful citizens of the Imperium, condemned for a minor theological disagreement, for reading a forbidden text out of curiosity, or simply for being in the wrong place when a planetary governor needed to make an example. They genuinely love the Emperor. They believe in the divinity of mankind's master, and for them, this is the cruelest torture of all. It creates a schism in the soul. Their faith tells them the Emperor is just, that his church is infallible. Therefore, this unimaginable suffering must be deserved. It must be a blessing. But every fiber of their being, every shred of their trapped consciousness screams that it is a monstrous injustice. Their love for the Emperor becomes the very lever used to break their minds, forcing them into a spiral of self-hatred and confusion where they must either believe their God is a monster or that they are so uniquely sinful that they deserve this. In the end, for some, the mind finds a way out. Not through escape, but through surrender. After years of this cognitive dissonance, something inside them shatters and is remade in the church's image. They begin to believe it. They accept the doctrine. They find a perverse sense of peace in the idea that their agony is holy, that their debasement is a form of worship. The internal screaming fades, not because the horror has ended, but because the person who was screaming has been completely eroded. They have been successfully converted into agreeing with their tormentors. In the quiet moments between the butchery and the sedatives, they no longer curse their fate. They pray. They thank the God Emperor for the gift of their pain. This is the ecclesiarchy's greatest and most terrible victory. A soul so completely broken that it sings praises to its own destruction. And yet, archoflagellation is only number 9 on our list. Why? Because for all its spiritual and psychological cruelty, it has a physical limit. The human body, even one augmented and sustained by imperial tech, can only take so much. The combat stimulants, the constant trauma, the metabolic strain, it all adds up. Eventually, after years or perhaps even decades, the flesh gives out. The heart ruptures, the nervous system collapses, the body fails, and with it, the torment ends. The trapped consciousness is, presumably, released into whatever awaits in the immaterium. This eventual biological end is a cold, distant, but very real comfort. It is an escape hatch. And for the fates that remain on our list, even that mercy has been removed. With the archoflagellants, for all their torment, there is an end. The flesh is weak, and even with the unholy science of the Imperium, it eventually fails. The heart gives out, the brain gives up, and the suffering ceases. It is a grim and distant hope, but it is a hope nonetheless. Now we cross a line. We leave behind the horrors that are merely physical, merely psychological, and we step into the realm of the truly metaphysical. We journey into the territory of the dark mechanicum and to our 8th worst fate, to be rendered into fuel for their soul furnaces. For those who don't know, the dark mechanicum are the fallen brothers of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They are the heretics, the tech priests who looked at the omnia and saw an insufficient God. They turned their worship to the ruinous powers of chaos, and in doing so, they cast off all restraint, all morality, all logic. Their technology is not science as we understand it. It is a blasphemous marriage of engineering and sorcery. They build machines that whisper promises, engines that bleed, and weapons that hunger. And among their most prolific and horrifying creations are the soul furnaces, vast industrial complexes designed for a single purpose, to harvest the very essence of a conscious being and refine it into a power source. The process is one of cold, passionless industrial-scale damnation. A victim captured in a raid or traded from a chaos warlord is not simply killed. They are brought to a processing chamber and placed within a horrifyingly intricate apparatus of gleaming chrome, rusted iron, and throbbing organic tubes. This machine is not a quick executioner. It is a separator. Needles of psychic resonance and ethereal energy are inserted not into the flesh, but into the boundary between body and soul. And then, with the slow, inexorable pull of a tectonic plate, the extraction begins. It can take days. Sometimes it takes weeks. The entire time, the victim is kept physically alive and, most importantly, fully conscious. Recovered accounts from the few who have witnessed it and escaped describe the sensation not as pain, but as an existential violation. The feeling of being turned inside out spiritually, while your body remains perfectly, agonizingly whole. You feel your memories, your identity, your very self being peeled away from your flesh like a sunburned layer of skin, and you are aware of every single agonizing second. But where does the soul go? Destruction would be a mercy, an end to the suffering, and the dark mechanicum are nothing if not efficient. A destroyed soul is a wasted resource. Instead, the extracted essence is funneled into containment fields, where it is refined, compressed, and bound into crystalline lattices, shimmering, multifaceted gems that hum with captured agony. These are the soul batteries of the heretics. The consciousness of the victim remains, fully aware, now trapped within this crystal prison. They have no body, no voice, no way to interact with the world. They are pure awareness, pressed together with thousands, sometimes millions of other souls in the same predicament. And all they feel is a constant, gnawing drain as the energy of their being is siphoned off to power a forge, to run the life support of a trader vessel, or to charge the plasma coils of a Hell Knight's cannon. It is an eternal state of exhaustion that never, ever reaches the release of unconsciousness. Entire trader forge worlds, planets of industry dedicated to chaos, run on the compressed suffering of billions. There are Titan-class war machines whose every apocalyptic footstep is powered by a city's worth of screaming, conscious souls. To the dark mechanicum, this isn't a tragedy, it's just power generation. So what is existence actually like for a soul that's been successfully processed and interred within a dark mechanicum power matrix? This is where the horror graduates from the merely ghastly to the truly incomprehensible. The soul is no longer tethered to a body. It has no eyes to see, no ears to hear, no nerves to feel pain in the conventional sense. It is pure, disembodied awareness, trapped in a state that has no physical analog. And this lack of physical reference is the first layer of the torture. Without a body, without the rising and setting of a sun, without the simple rhythm of a heartbeat, the soul loses all conception of time. It exists in an eternal, featureless now. Inquisitory forces who have managed to capture and shatter these soul prisons have documented the after-effects on the psychic echoes left behind. They found souls that believed they had been trapped for mere minutes, when the matrix itself was confirmed to be centuries old. Conversely, they found others who were convinced they had endured 10,000 years of torment. Their minds stretched to breaking across imaginary eons, when records showed they were captured less than a year prior. Is it worse to think your suffering has just begun, or to believe it has no end? The soul furnaces provide both experiences, often simultaneously. You simply do not and cannot know how long you have been there, or how long you have left. There is no clock, only the drain. But you are not alone. That is the next turn of the screw. A single soul is inefficient. The dark mechanicum are all about efficiency. These crystalline matrices are packed, compressed with thousands, sometimes millions of individual consciousnesses, all pushed together into an impossible metaphysical density. They can sense each other. They feel the raw, undiluted terror of their neighbors. They are bathed in the psychic screams of a million other souls, a constant, crushing wave of despair, panic, and agony. Imagine being locked in a tiny room with a million people all having a panic attack at once, forever. Communication, in a rudimentary telepathic sense, is possible, but it's agonizing. Each thought sent out is like a shard of glass scraping against the raw essence of every other soul it touches, causing ripples of shared pain. Most souls, after a time, simply stop. They retreat into what's left of themselves, a tiny, silent scream in a chorus of damnation. But there's nowhere to retreat to. You are surrounded on all sides, at all times, by the suffering of others, which becomes indistinguishable from your own. And then there is the function, the entire purpose of your continued existence, the drain. When a dark mechanicum war engine needs power, it draws it from the matrix. For the souls within, this is felt as direct spiritual damage. It is the sensation of having pieces of your essential self, your memories, your personality, the very stuff that makes you you, torn away, shredded, and converted into raw energy. It doesn't just hurt, it unmakes you. And unlike physical damage, this spiritual decay doesn't heal. The soul slowly, incrementally diminishes. You become less than you were, your consciousness fraying, your identity thinning, fading toward a final, merciful oblivion. But you are never allowed to reach it. The systems are designed to keep the soul just alive enough to continue producing energy. You are held in a perpetual state of fading, forever on the verge of non-existence, but denied the release. And the final, perfect, grimdark insult? Some heretics, with a flair for cruel irony, actually market this fate to the desperate and the decadent as a form of immortality, a way to escape the death of the flesh and exist forever as pure energy. They just neglect to mention the fine print. It's crucial to understand that this isn't some bespoke, artisanal torment reserved for special enemies of the dark mechanicum. This is industry. This is their core infrastructure. The soul furnaces are not a punishment. They are a power source. And like any resource, they must be harvested at a colossal scale. Entire forge worlds of the heretics, shadowed citadels of impossible geometry, are powered by the silent, psychic screaming of captured populations. This is the grim reality behind their technological supremacy. They have solved the energy crisis of the 41st millennium by weaponizing damnation itself. To fuel this infernal industry, the dark mechanicum mounts raids not for territory, not for artifacts, not even for slaves in the traditional sense. They are hunting for consciousness. Their fleets, bristling with forbidden technologies, descend upon unsuspecting imperial worlds with the cold logic of a farmer reaping a field. They've perfected the process, creating specialized harvester ships that are essentially mobile soul processing plants. Sometimes the harvest is brutally quick, a lightning strike on a hab block, snatching a few million souls before the Imperial Navy can even react. But the truly efficient, and thus truly monstrous operations are the sieges. Imagine a fleet arriving in orbit, not to bombard, but to deploy vast, impenetrable containment fields. The planet is cut off. No one can leave. Then, the extraction facilities are deployed to the surface, and the population is simply processed, slowly, methodically, over months or even years. The terror of those awaiting their turn is not a bug in the system, it's a feature. The sheer psychic anguish of a planet watching itself be consumed generates its own resonant energy in the warp, a delicious appetizer for the heretics and their demonic patrons before the main course is served. To put this into perspective, let's look at the documented fall of the agro-world Prosperity 7. It was an unremarkable planet, home to 8.2 billion souls, a breadbasket for its subsector. A dark mechanicum fleet arrived without warning, sealed the system, and began its work. For 3 standard years, the population was systematically rounded up and fed into the soul furnaces. Imperial records, pieced together from astropathic distress calls and later reconnaissance, indicate the operation was deemed only moderately successful by the heretics. There was, in their cold calculus, significant soul loss due to premature death from resistance activities. The billions of consciousnesses that were successfully harvested were compressed into matrices and distributed across the fleet's power systems. Right now, centuries later, the terrified mind of a farmer from Prosperity 7 might be powering the targeting cogitator on a Khitan Ravager, his family's screams fueling the shields of a warship halfway across the galaxy. This is why being fed to a soul furnace is only the 8th worst fate on our list. The experience is an exercise in unimaginable, metaphysical horror. But, and this is the slimmest, coldest comfort imaginable, the souls within the matrices do eventually fade. Over the course of millennia, the constant energy drain erodes the consciousness completely. It isn't a true death. The metaphysical residue of the soul remains, still useful as a power source. But awareness, the capacity to suffer, finally ceases. For the prisoners of the dark mechanicum, this final, utter dissolution is the closest thing to salvation they will ever receive. It is a mercy that takes an eternity to arrive. The fates to come, however, are far more patient. They are designed to deny even this grim release. We now climb to our 7th fate, and in doing so, we pivot. We turn away from the exotic cruelties of Xenos pirates and heretical tech priests and look inward, to a horror born, sanctioned, and mass-produced by the holy Imperium of Man itself. This is a fate not inflicted by monsters in the dark, but by the very system that claims to protect humanity from them. This is conversion into a servitor. To the uninitiated, a servitor is simply a mindless cyborg drone, a biological robot used for menial labor. And for many of them, that's true. But the reality of their creation is far more sinister. The process begins with a living human subject, a criminal, a political dissident, a debtor, or often just someone who was in the wrong place when a labor quota needed to be filled. The subject is taken to a mechanicum facility and prepared for lobotomy. But this is not a simple procedure designed to erase the mind. That would be inefficient. No, the Adeptus Mechanicus has perfected the art of targeted destruction. Using arcane and terrifyingly precise surgical tools, they systematically dismantle the personality. The brain regions responsible for self-awareness, for emotion, for memory, for hope, they are cauterized, suppressed, or scooped out entirely. What's left is a carefully curated bundle of neural pathways, motor control, basic logic, and the capacity to have new skills hardwired into the remaining gray matter. They don't destroy the person, they hollow them out, leaving behind a flesh-and-blood computer that can be programmed to perform a task. And here lies the true soul-crushing horror of this fate. The process is imperfect. The Imperium churns out billions of servitors. It's an industrial process, and like any factory line, there are defects. It is a statistical certainty that a percentage of these conversions fail. The lobotomy is incomplete. The mind isn't erased. The consciousness remains, fully intact, but stripped of all control. They become a prisoner in their own body, a silent passenger in a machine made of their own flesh, forced to watch as their hands perform actions they did not command, as their legs walk to destinations they did not choose. Imagine being a gun servitor. Your body is bolted into a defensive wall, your arms fused to a heavy bolter. For decades you stand, unmoving. You can't speak, you can't blink unless the programming allows it. You just watch. Then, when a programmed target appears, you watch in horror as your own hands unleash a torrent of death. You feel the weapon buck, you see the carnage, but you are not in control. You are a living gun turret screaming into a void that no one can hear. Or perhaps you become a technical servitor assigned to maintain a reactor on a starship. For the rest of your functional life, your task is to turn the same sequence of bolts day after day, year after year. The same motion 1,000,000 times over. Your mind, the same mind that once held conversations and dreamed of the future, is now forced to observe an eternity of meaningless, repetitive labor, unable to stop, unable to rest, unable to even think a new thought without the rhythm of the work intruding. The Mechanicum even has a term for the glitches that reveal this inner suffering: retention syndrome. It's a footnote in their maintenance logs. A domestic servitor, serving food at a noble's banquet, that pauses for a fraction of a second before a mirror, its face twitching with an expression that should be impossible. A combat servitor, marching into a suicidal charge that has tears silently streaming from its optical sensors. A maintenance drone that flinches just before plunging its hands into a vat of corrosive chemicals. These are not malfunctions. They are the ghosts in the machine, the last faint signals from a person buried alive, begging for a release that will never come. So what is it actually like inside one of these failed conversions? What does a retained servitor experience? It is a state of being for which we have no adequate words, a waking nightmare engineered into permanence. The conscious mind remains, but it is locked in a sensory prison. It sees through its own eyes, but cannot choose where to look. It feels the strain in muscles it cannot command. It is a passenger, strapped into the driver's seat of its own body, watching a machine perform actions in its name. Every moment is a battle of will that is lost before it begins. You try to scream, but your vocal cords only emit a pre-programmed chime. You try to stop your hand from reaching for a tool, but your arm moves with an alien certainty, completely divorced from your intent. And then comes the true, refined cruelty of the situation: recognition. A servitor retains fragments of its old life, flashes of memory that the lobotomy failed to erase. Perhaps it's a domestic servitor, programmed to pour wine at a lavish party. It shuffles through the room, a mindless automaton to the guests, but inside, a man is screaming. He recognizes the face of his wife, laughing with another man. He sees his own children, now older, who look at his cybernetic form with a mixture of pity and disgust, never knowing the man they once called father is trapped just inches away, behind dead, unblinking eyes. They speak about him in the past tense, right in front of him. He was a good man, his wife might say, before his debts caught up to him. It's a mercy, really. He doesn't suffer. But he does. He hears every word. He understands perfectly, and his body just keeps pouring the wine. Over time, this perpetual state of helplessness grinds the mind down. Sanity is not a fortress. It's a structure that requires maintenance, and the retained servitor has no tools. The consciousness begins to fray, to fragment under the sheer, unending strain. But this madness brings no relief, no gentle slide into oblivion. It's just another layer of torment.
Instead of a coherent person trapped inside, there is now a swirling vortex of shattered memories, raw emotions, and screaming impulses, all still aware enough to feel pain, but no longer capable of processing it. The internal monologue of "this isn't me" dissolves into a cacophony of pure, incoherent terror that never, ever stops. We know this isn't just speculation. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in their cold pursuit of knowledge, have documented it. There is the infamous case of a unit recovered from a destroyed forge on the world of Gryphon 4, designated Servitor 7734 Alpha. It was a technical servitor damaged in an arc attack. During its deconstruction, a Magos biologist discovered something astonishing. The lobotomy had been catastrophically botched. The servitor retained nearly 80% of its original personality and memories. It had been converted 12 years prior for the crime of accumulating unsanctioned debt. For 12 years, this individual had been fully, horribly aware, forced to perform endless, repetitive maintenance on a Prometheum waste recycling system. The Magos, in a rare fit of curiosity, managed to bypass the servitor's vocal inhibitors and reconnect its speech center. After more than a decade of silent screaming, the first words it spoke were not a torrent of rage or a plea for its family. They were simple, whispered, and utterly broken. "Kill me. Please, kill me." But the real soul-crushing horror of servitor conversion isn't just the personal nightmare of the retained individual. It's the fact that this practice isn't some dark secret hidden in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. It is official, state-sanctioned policy, endorsed and celebrated by the very institutions meant to protect humanity. This isn't the work of chaos cultists or alien sadists. This is the Imperium of Man in broad daylight, turning its own citizens into lobotomized drones and calling it a mercy. The theological gymnastics required to justify this are breathtaking in their cruelty. The ecclesiarchy, the state church of the Imperium, teaches that servitor conversion is a holy act. It is a path to redemption. By being stripped of free will, the subject is also stripped of the capacity for sin. By being shorn of their personality, they are freed from worldly desire and the burden of choice. Their mindless labor becomes a pure, unblemished prayer to the Emperor. They are elevated, not degraded, becoming perfect instruments of the master of mankind's will. This propaganda is so effective, so deeply woven into the fabric of imperial society, that to question the morality of servitor conversion is to question the wisdom of the ecclesiarchy itself, an act that is, itself, a crime worthy of servitor conversion. It is a perfect closed loop of institutional horror. And who exactly is being granted this mercy? The Imperium will tell you it's for the worst criminals, the unrepentant heretics, and sure, they end up on the slab. But the definition of criminal in the 41st millennium is terrifyingly broad. Did you fail to meet your factory's production quota? Servitor. Did you speak ill of a local planetary governor? Servitor. Were you born with a minor mutation? Are you related to someone who was declared a heretic? Did you accumulate too much debt to the wrong people? Servitor, servitor, servitor. On many worlds, it's simply a matter of economics. If the Adeptus Mechanicus needs 1 million new biological components for a fleet tender, they don't put out a job posting. They requisition the planet's surplus population. It's a threat that hangs over every single citizen of the Imperium. One wrong step, one unlucky day, and you could go from a person to a product. Now, let's talk about the scale, because this is where the horror becomes astronomical. The Imperium is a galaxy-spanning empire of 1 million worlds. It is estimated that billions, perhaps tens of billions of new servitors are produced every single year. Let's be conservative.
Let's say, based on the Mechanicum's own records of retention syndrome, that only 1% of all conversions are botched. Only 1 in 100 results in a person remaining trapped and aware inside the machine. That sounds like a great success rate, until you do the math. 1% of 10 billion is 100 million. That means, as a conservative floor, the righteous Imperium is creating 100 million silent, screaming, conscious prisoners every single year. An entire population of souls trapped in living hell. A number that has been accumulating for 10,000 years. And that is why servitor conversion is the 7th worst fate in Warhammer 40,000. It is a moral black hole at the very heart of the Imperium. But it is only number 7 for one critical reason. It ends. A servitor's biological components eventually fail. After years or perhaps decades of mindless labor and internal agony, the body gives out. The machine stops. And the consciousness, if it's still there, is presumably released into the silence of death. This eventual mechanical failure is the only mercy the system provides. The fates still to come on this list offer no such guarantee. They remove even that faint, distant light at the end of the tunnel. With the fate of the servitor, we saw the Imperium's cold, mechanical cruelty, the reduction of a person to a product. But as we climb higher up this ladder of horrors, the torment becomes more spiritual, more intimate. We now arrive at our 6th worst fate, a destiny reserved for those who are both blessed and cursed from birth, a fate that is presented not as a punishment but as the highest possible honor, being processed by the black ships. Across the million worlds of the Imperium, humanity is a psychic tinderbox. On any given planet, at any moment, a child might suddenly hear the thoughts of others. An adult might accidentally set a room ablaze with a flash of anger. These are psychers, and the Imperium both needs and fears them. To manage this threat, it employs the Adeptus Astra Telepathica and their dreaded fleet, the Black Ships. These are not vessels of war. They are gargantuan, silent harvesters of souls, crisscrossing the galaxy on a centuries-long mission to collect the psychic tithe. When a black ship arrives in orbit, a pall of dread falls over the world below. Every citizen knows what it means. Parents who have hidden their psychically gifted children must now surrender them. Adults who have suppressed their own burgeoning abilities are identified and taken from their homes, their jobs, their families. They are told it is for the good of the Imperium. They are told their sacrifice is noble, that they are being called to serve the Emperor on Holy Terra itself. Some, raised on this propaganda, go willingly, with a sense of solemn pride. Most are given no choice at all. The journey to Terra is its own unique hell. The psychers are herded into Gellerfield-protected holds, vast chambers lined with suppression cells that nullify their powers and block out most sensory input. For months, sometimes for years, they travel in near-total darkness and silence, isolated from the universe, their minds turned inward. Without the anchor of their psychic senses, many go insane. They claw at the walls of their cells, screaming into a void that doesn't answer, their minds shattering long before the ship ever reaches its destination. Those who survive the journey with their sanity intact arrive at the throne world, Terra, and are subjected to the great evaluation. Here, a flicker of hope emerges. The most powerful and stable among them are selected for training. They might become astropaths, the telepathic communicators who bind the Imperium together. They could become navigators, guiding ships through the horrors of the warp. Their lives will be hard, their surface demanding, but they will live. They are the lucky ones. But most are not so lucky. The vast majority are deemed too weak, too unstable, or simply surplus to requirements. And for these souls, the Imperium has a different purpose. They are not executed. To simply kill them would be to waste the precious psychic potential simmering within their souls. Instead, they are taken to be processed. They are led to vast humming cathedrals of machinery, and they are told they are about to receive the ultimate benediction. They will fuel the two psychic pillars upon which all of humanity rests, the divine light of the Astronomicon and the life-sustaining mechanisms of the Golden Throne itself. They are to become one with the Emperor. And so, believing they are about to achieve a holy apotheosis, they are connected to the extraction machines. The process is not quick. It is a slow, agonizing drain, designed to pull every last shred of psychic energy from their being, while medical servitors keep their bodies alive. It can take days, it can take weeks. For the strongest among them, it can take years of sustained, conscious agony. Their sacrifice is indeed the highest honor, they are told. And they believe it, right up until the moment the draining begins, and they realize that their holy union with the Emperor is not a spiritual ascension, but the feeling of being slowly, methodically, and eternally devoured. The unsuitable psyker is led from their holding cell into the heart of the Sanctum Calipathica. The air grows thick, heavy with a pressure that feels like deep water, and a sound begins to build. Not a sound for the ears, but for the soul. It is a low, continuous moan of 1,000,000 voices in quiet despair. They are brought before the choir halls of the Astronomicon, and the great brass doors part, revealing the source of the sound. Inside is a cathedral of torment. Vast chambers stretch into the gloom, filled with row upon row of colossal devices that are part throne, part surgical table, and part altar. On each one is a human figure, wired and tubed, their body held in a rigid state of undeath. The psyker is strapped into one of these extraction thrones. Cold metal clasps lock around their limbs. A network of shimmering needles and crystalline conduits descends, piercing their skull, their spine, their chest. They are being connected, hardwired into the great machine. Medical servitors, their faces blank and pitiless, move with silent efficiency, attaching nutrient lines and waste recycling units. Their purpose is not to provide comfort. It is to ensure the body does not fail before the soul is completely spent. Then the process begins. It starts as a faint tingling, a strange resonance deep within their being. But it rapidly escalates into a sensation for which there is no human word. The closest any survivor has come to describing it is the feeling of having your soul pulled out through your pores. But that fails to capture the scale of the violation. It is a spiritual flensing. The machine does not just take energy, it takes them. Memories are the first to go. They don't simply fade, they are torn loose. The psyker might suddenly feel the ghost of their mother's face, only to have the memory violently ripped away, leaving a bleeding void in their mind where that love used to be. They feel their childhood being unwritten, their triumphs and failures scoured from existence, their very identity dismantled piece by piece. And they are not alone. Through the psychic connection, they feel the others. Thousands upon thousands of them, all undergoing the same process. Their terror, their agony, their confusion bleeds into a single, overwhelming chorus of suffering that echoes in the mind of every victim. It is the sound one account described as what you would hear if every sad moment in human history happened simultaneously. There is no escape from it. Their own screaming mind is just one voice in a choir of damnation, their pain an insignificant drop in an ocean of anguish. The duration of this horror is a function of their own cursed gift. A weak psyker, one with only a flicker of power, is mercifully consumed within days. Their soul is a dry twig thrown on a bonfire, burning bright and fast before being reduced to ash.
But the strong ones, those who might have become powerful servants of the Imperium, they endure the longest. Their greater psychic reservoir means there is simply more to drain. They can persist for weeks, for months, for years. For the most powerful, their sentence can stretch across decades. Their bodies kept functioning by the indifferent machines as their minds are slowly, methodically erased. Long after their name is gone, long after their personality has been sandblasted into nothingness, a core of suffering awareness remains. A final ember of consciousness that exists only to feel itself being consumed, until, at long last, even that spark is extinguished. What makes this fate spiritually horrifying, a torment that transcends the mere agony of the body, is its finality. The psychers brought to the Golden Throne are not just being killed, they are being consumed. Their souls, the very essence of their being, are not being released into the warp to face the judgment of gods or the light of the Emperor. They are being used as fuel. Their consciousness is not transitioning to an afterlife. It is being systematically unmade, converted into raw energy that sustains the faltering Imperium. For a citizen of the Imperium, death in service is the ultimate goal. The promise whispered in every cathedral and battlefield sermon is that a loyal soul, upon death, is sheltered by the Emperor's psychic might, granted peace and protection in the tumultuous ocean of the warp. It is the one comfort in a galaxy of horrors. But for the psychers of the choir, this promise is a lie. Their sacrifice does not bring them closer to the Emperor in death. It utterly prevents them from ever reaching him, or anything else, ever again. Their service is annihilation. Many of the psychers taken by the black ships are devoutly faithful. They arrive on Terra believing they are answering the highest calling, ready to offer their lives for the master of mankind. They are strapped into the extraction thrones with prayers on their lips. The horror begins when they realize the truth. As the machine drains them, as their memories are torn away, a deeper understanding dawns. They feel their soul not departing, but dissolving. They sense that there is no destination, only an end. At this moment of ultimate cosmic betrayal, their faith shatters. The God Emperor they loved, the Savior they worshipped, is not saving them. He is presiding over their final, total erasure. For some, their last moments of coherent thought are filled with a despair so profound it becomes a psychic scream, a curse against the very deity they once revered. But for others, something even more terrible happens. In the face of their own annihilation, their faith twists into a final, monstrous shape. They rationalize their fate as an even greater sacrifice. They are not just giving their lives, they are giving their eternity. They are sacrificing their very soul, ensuring it can never be reborn, never be rewarded, so that the Imperium might live another day. Their internal screaming fades not into peace, but into a broken, hollow acceptance that their own non-existence is a holy act. The scale of this spiritual holocaust is difficult to comprehend. The Astronomicon requires the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers every single day. That is 365,000 souls a year, systematically and completely annihilated. This has continued, without pause, for 10,000 years. The total number of conscious beings consumed by this process is in the trillions, a debt of souls so vast it defies imagination. It is an industrial process of spiritual destruction. And that is why this fate is only number 6. Because eventually, the draining is complete. The last flicker of awareness is extinguished. The victim achieves true and final oblivion. In a universe of endless torment, the cold, dark peace of non-existence is a mercy. The fates to come deny even that.
So far, every fate on this list, however monstrous, has had a twisted kind of logic to it. Penal service is punishment. Servitors are labor. The souls fed to the Astronomicon are fuel. There is a grim, bureaucratic, and shockingly practical purpose behind the Imperium's cruelty. But now, we leave all that behind. We are moving from the horrors of mankind to the nightmares of the Xenos, and we arrive at a place where suffering has no purpose at all. It has only aesthetics. Welcome to Fate number 5, becoming a living canvas for a dark Eldar homunculus. To understand this, you must first understand who or what the homunculi are. Within the shadowy, impossible city of Comarog, they are the absolute masters of flesh sculpting. They are ancient, withered beings who have elevated torture beyond a mere practice and into a high art form, an art they have been perfecting for millions of years. To a homunculus, a living being is not a soul, not a person, but a medium. Your flesh is their clay. Your pain is a vibrant color on their palette. Your screams are a symphony they are composing. They are not torturing you for information, or for penance, or to power a machine. They are torturing you because they believe they can transform your agony into a breathtaking masterpiece. It begins with a raid, a flash of impossible speed as a dark Eldar ship tears a hole in reality and descends upon your world. You are not fighting a war, you are being harvested. The lucky ones die in the initial, blindingly fast assault. The unlucky are dragged in chains onto sleek, bladed vessels and spirited away to the dark city. There, in the stinking, blood-slick laboratories of the homunculus covens, you are brought before your new owner. The homunculus doesn't look at you with hatred or anger or even malice. It looks at you with the cool, detached appraisal of a master sculptor studying a fresh block of marble. It prods your flesh, analyzes your psychological profile, and assesses your artistic potential. It is deciding what unique expressions of suffering your specific body and mind can be forced to produce. Are you beautiful? You will be grotesquely remade. Are you strong and resilient? Your endurance will be tested to its absolute limit and then far beyond. Are you psychologically complex? You will be broken in the most elaborate and inventive ways imaginable. Everyone has something to offer their art. The homunculi will find it. And here is the fundamental horror that elevates this to number 5 on our list. The homunculi have utterly mastered the prevention of death. They can keep a subject alive through any injury, any dismemberment, any extremity of pain that would instantly kill a normal being 10 times over. Your heart stops? They have a clockwork device to restart it indefinitely. You bleed out? They possess alchemical serums to regenerate your blood in seconds. Your nervous system finally shuts down from sheer, overwhelming agony? They will simply rewire it to be even more sensitive, to feel even more. You do not die when your body gives out. You die only when the homunculus decides their work of art is complete. And homunculi are patient, immortal artists. Their great works can take centuries. You are not a prisoner serving a sentence. You are a masterpiece in progress, and the artist has all the time in the world. The homunculus does not rush. It may begin with something simple, a test of your sensory limits. It might spend a week meticulously flaying the skin from your arm, keeping you perfectly conscious, only to graft it back on, nerve by painful nerve, just to see how the tissue accepts the trauma. But these are just warm-up exercises, sketches before the true masterpiece begins. Soon, you will be introduced to one of their signature techniques, a procedure known simply as the unmaking. You are suspended in an anti-grav field. your body held immobile in the center of a sterile, circular chamber. The homunculus, its face a mask of ancient, wrinkled parchment, approaches with tools that gleam with a sickening light. It begins to surgically disassemble you piece by piece while you are forced to watch. It removes your left hand with surgical precision, cauterizing the stump so you don't bleed out, and places the hand on a velvet cushion in a display niche. Then your right foot. Then an eye, its optic nerve still connected by a shimmering thread of energy, positioned so that you can now see yourself from a second, disembodied angle. The process can take months. Your organs are removed, placed in nutrient-rich crystal caskets, still functioning. Your limbs are arranged in artistic poses. All the while you are aware, your mind screaming in a body that can no longer respond, watching yourself be reduced to a collection of biological components. And when the unmaking is complete, when your entire being is laid out like a museum exhibit, the homunculus might decide the composition is flawed, and so it begins the reassembly. Only this time, it puts you back together wrong. Your arm is attached where your leg should be. Your lungs are inverted. All so you can have the unique artistic experience of being unmade all over again. Perhaps your artistic potential lies not in deconstruction, but in integration. You might find yourself taken to one of the infamous pain gardens. From a distance, these are places of breathtaking, alien beauty. Crystalline structures pulse with soft light, and flora of impossible colors grows in elegant, sculpted arrangements. But as you get closer, you see the truth. The weeping willows are made of braided spinal columns. The blooming flowers are meticulously arranged human lungs, breathing in unison. You are to be the newest addition. The homunculus grafts you into a living wall, your nervous system painstakingly teased out from your body and woven into the larger structure. Every nerve ending is externalized, exposed to the air, to the chemical mists, to the very vibrations of the garden. You feel everything. The joy of a nearby Kabbalite, the agony of the victim next to you, the gentle caress of a breeze, all are translated into overwhelming, unending, raw sensation. You are no longer a person. You are a living instrument in an orchestra of agony, contributing your unique note of suffering to the garden's terrible harmony. But the homunculi are also scientists of a sort, and some torments are experiments. You may be strapped into a device known as the pendulum. It is a machine designed for one purpose: to kill you, resurrect you, and then kill you again, endlessly. The homunculus experiments with the very concept of death. The first time, it might be a simple blade to the heart. You die, you feel the release, and then a jolt of alien energy, and you are alive again, gasping on the slab, the memory of oblivion fresh in your mind. The next death is drowning. The one after that is immolation. The homunculus varies the speed, the method, the intensity, taking meticulous notes on your psychological response. You have died 1,000 times. You remember every single one. You know with absolute certainty that you will die 1,000 more. And through it all, the homunculus cultivates your despair. It will offer you false hope, a glimpse of an escape route, a whispered promise of release, only to snatch it away at the last second, savoring the exquisite taste of your shattered spirit. For in the art of the homunculi, physical pain is merely the canvas. True despair is the final, vibrant color that makes the masterpiece complete. What elevates this from mere torture to a fate worse than almost any other is a single horrifying variable: time. For their victims, the homunculi have conquered death. They are masters of flesh crafting, capable of not just inflicting damage, but repairing it with an artisan's care. A heart that fails under the strain of agony can be replaced. Nerves that burn out from overstimulation can be regrown. A body that wastes away from a millennium of disuse can be rejuvenated, its cells coaxed back into a state of youthful vitality. Your body is no longer your own vessel, subject to the natural laws of decay and failure. It is the homunculus's canvas, and they can keep it functional indefinitely. The only thing that determines your lifespan is the artist's continued interest in their work. And homunculi are very, very patient artists. They live for thousands of years. To them, a human century is a pleasant, productive work week. This isn't a theoretical horror. Within the shadowed spires of Kamarag, there are living testaments to this endless suffering. Visitors to the Archon's palaces might be shown the Weeping Gallery. It's a hall lined with what appear to be beautiful, crystalline statues of weeping figures, their faces locked in expressions of perfect sorrow. But they are not statues. They are people. People captured during raids on Imperial worlds 10,000 years ago. They were taken when the Horus Heresy was still a recent memory, when the Emperor had only just been interred on the Golden Throne. And they are still alive. Kept in a state of perpetual, conscious grief by alchemical and psychic means, their bodies preserved against the ravages of millennia. Their tears, which fall endlessly, are collected in crystal vials, a prized delicacy in Dark Eldar society, said to contain the pure distilled essence of 10,000 years of undiluted anguish. Elsewhere, one might hear the sound of the choir immortal. These are victims whose vocal cords and lungs have been sculpted into instruments of perfect sonic misery. They are arranged in vast auditoriums, their bodies fused into the very architecture and forced to sing. Their song is not music, but a carefully orchestrated symphony of screams, wails, and sobs that has been echoing through the dark city for centuries. Each member of the choir was once a person, and they remain so, their consciousness trapped in a body that does nothing but produce the sound of its own torment, forever. You might think that after a few centuries, the mind would break, that it would retreat into catatonia or madness, finding some merciful escape in the collapse of its own sanity. And you would be right. But the homunculi know this. They anticipate it. They view a victim's psychological adaptation not as an end, but as a new and interesting challenge. The moment your mind begins to build walls, to find a sliver of numbness, the homunculus will notice. They will change the torture. They will introduce a new sensation, a new psychological violation, a new form of despair specifically engineered to shatter your newfound resilience. You are not allowed to adapt. You are not allowed to find peace in madness. The torture will always evolve faster than your ability to cope with it. So why is this only number 5 on our list? Because as impossible as it sounds, there is an out. It is an infinitesimally small chance, a statistical improbability, but it exists. A homunculus might simply grow bored. Their magnum opus might be declared complete, and they might discard you, leaving you to finally, mercifully die. A rival cabal might raid the laboratory and destroy you in the crossfire. A desperate rescue mission against all odds could succeed. The suffering is indefinite, but it is not necessarily eternal. There is a non-zero chance that it will end. The fates that remain on this list are worse because they take even that final desperate hope and crush it into dust. We now move from the exquisite, externalized artistry of Xeno's cruelty to a horror born from within, a torment that was not inflicted by captors, but chosen out of love. Our 4th worst fate in the galaxy is to bear the butcher's nails. The nails were a form of debased archaeotech, neural implants discovered on the brutal world of Nuceria. They were designed for one purpose: to turn gladiators into unstoppable killing machines. They were first hammered into the skull of a slave who would one day be a Primarch, Angron. The device was a crown of metallic thorns that burrowed deep into his brain, intertwining with his neural pathways. It did two things with perfect, horrifying efficiency. First, it flooded his mind with a constant, agonizing pain, a white-hot, grinding pressure that felt like his very skull was being drilled from the inside out. Second, it dampened every emotion except for pure, unrestrained rage. The only way to find even a moment's relief from the ceaseless agony was to give in to that rage, to engage in acts of extreme, bloody violence. For every enemy he butchered, the nails would grant him a few precious seconds of quiet before the pain roared back, demanding more. When the Emperor found Angron, he recognized the nails for what they were: a torturous corruption that was already destroying his son. But the technology was so invasive, so deeply integrated, that even the master of mankind could not remove them without killing him. So Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters' Legion, was brought into the Great Crusade already broken, a demigod in constant screaming torment. His sons, the legionaries of the 12th, saw their father's suffering. They saw his distance, his uncontrollable fury, his inability to connect with them. And in a desperate, tragic act of filial empathy, they decided that the only way to understand their father, to share his burden, was to take it upon themselves. They reverse-engineered the nails and, one by one, willingly drove the cursed technology into their own brains. They thought they were building a bridge to their Primarch. Instead, they had just begun to demolish themselves. The immediate effect was the pain. A constant, throbbing headache that quickly escalated into a neurological firestorm. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. Focusing on anything but the agony and the burgeoning rage required immense and quickly depleting willpower. The nails were not a simple implant. They were a parasite. They grew, their tendrils replacing healthy brain tissue, destroying the parts of the mind responsible for compassion, for patience, for joy. Removal was impossible. The nails became load-bearing. They were now a fundamental part of the host's cognitive architecture. To take them out would be to scoop out the brain itself. The World Eaters' love for their father became their damnation. They had hoped to share his pain, to lessen his load by dividing it among thousands. But the nails did not work that way. The pain could not be divided. It could only be multiplied. Each warrior now carried the full, undiluted agony of the original, and the only cure was the same as their father's: slaughter. Their desire for connection had locked them into a feedback loop of suffering and violence, a slow, grinding process that would erase everything they once were, leaving only the butcher. The true horror of the butcher's nails wasn't the initial blinding agony. It was the slow, methodical demolition of the self and being forced to watch the wrecking ball swing. This wasn't a sudden transformation into a monster. It was a gradual erasure, a cognitive parasite that consumed its host piece by piece, leaving them aware enough to catalog their own disappearance. In the early stages, a World Eater might have dismissed it: a shorter temper, a flash of rage during a sparring session that felt disproportionate, even shameful. He'd tell himself it was the stress of the campaign, the constant warfare. He was still in control. But then the changes became undeniable. He'd struggle to recall the feeling of a peaceful memory, the face of a loved one from his life before the Legion. The memory was there, a file name in his mind, but the emotional data attached to it was corrupted, then deleted. Things he once loved, a particular style of poetry, the quiet satisfaction of maintaining his war gear, the camaraderie of a shared meal, now felt like hollow echoes. In their place grew a new, terrible satisfaction found only in the wet crunch of bone and the spray of hot blood. He would look at his hands after a battle, slick with gore, and feel a flicker of something that wasn't duty or victory, but simple, primal pleasure. And in that moment, he would know he was changing. He was losing. What made the nails so uniquely cruel, however, were the lucid moments. The degradation wasn't a smooth, linear descent into madness. It was a jagged, chaotic fall. For a few minutes, or maybe just a few seconds, the storm inside a legionary's mind would inexplicably break. The pain would recede to a dull throb. The rage would quiet. And in that sudden, terrifying silence, the man he used to be would look out through the monster's eyes. He would remember. He'd remember the sound of his own laughter, the concept of peace, the names of brothers he now only saw as obstacles on the way to the next kill. He'd see the butcher he had become with perfect, horrifying clarity, a stranger wearing his face. The grief and self-loathing in those brief seconds were more painful than the nails themselves. And then, as if punishing him for the moment of peace, the pain would roar back tenfold. The rage would surge, and clarity would once again drown in a sea of red. This process is documented in the fragments that survived the heresy. One World Eater's captain, Latara Saren's respected subordinate, was known to write letters to his sons back home, trying to preserve a record of the man he was before he inevitably forgot them. His early letters are filled with love and pride. Later ones are short, confused, angry. His final, recovered message, scrawled on a data slate, contained only 2 words: "Kill me." Another, an apothecary named Varl, kept meticulous notes on his own mental decay, documenting the specific memories he could no longer access, the emotions that had vanished, the growing compulsion for violence. He was a scientist to the last, cataloging his own transformation into something he knew was no longer human. There was no cure. There was no surgery that could remove the parasite without destroying the host. There was no psychic discipline or strength of will that could halt the decay. Once the nails were in, there was only the slow, grinding journey to zero, a path every World Eater walked with the full, conscious horror of knowing exactly what awaited them at the end. The journey ends, but the legionary does not die. He simply stops being. The final state of a bearer of the butcher's nails is not a warrior at the peak of his rage, but an absence at the center of a storm. The man he was, the person with a name, a history, a flicker of hope, or a memory of home, is gone, scoured away by a decade of neurological corrosion. What remains is a biological automaton, a vessel of flesh and ceramite animated by 2 simple interlocking directives: the ceaseless, grinding agony inside its skull, and the knowledge that only the act of killing provides a fleeting moment of relief. It no longer remembers peace, so it cannot miss it. It no longer has a past, so it cannot regret it. It is a machine made of meat, and its only function is murder. This raises a chilling philosophical question. Does this state even constitute life? If a man's personality, his memories, his capacity for love, loyalty, and reason are all utterly destroyed, is the body that continues to walk and fight truly him? The grim answer of the 40K universe is a resounding yes. The soul remains tethered to the flesh. The nervous system still screams with the undiminished pain of the nails, and some core, primal consciousness persists. It is aware enough to suffer, but not enough to comprehend what it has lost. It is a state of pure, unthinking agony, an existence reduced to a feedback loop of pain and violence. Death would be a release. Oblivion would be a mercy. The nails deny both. Herein lies the ultimate, cruel irony of the World Eater's damnation. The nails worked. They succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. They were designed to forge better, more relentless warriors, and they did precisely that. A fully degraded World Eater is a near-perfect killing machine. It feels no fear, no hesitation, no pity. It will not break, it will not rout, it will not stop until it or its target is utterly destroyed.
The legionaries who hammered these spikes into their own skulls, seeking to share their father's burden and become greater warriors in his image, received their wish. They were granted the strength they craved, but the price was everything that made them a person in the first place. And at the heart of this galactic tragedy stands Angren, the Red Angel, the slave of Nuceria. He is the Alpha and the Omega of this specific hell. He did not choose the nails, they were forced upon him, a tool of his enslavement. He was a noble soul, a primarch who fought for freedom, twisted into a monster by technology he could not escape. His greatest pain was not the agony in his own head, but watching his sons, his entire legion, mutilate themselves in a misguided act of love and solidarity, following him into the same prison. In his own moments of lucidity, he saw his children willingly become the very thing he was forced to be, and he was powerless to stop them. His damnation was not just his own, but the damnation of his entire lineage, a legacy of pain he never wanted. This slow, conscious erasure of the self is why the butcher's nails rank as the fourth worst fate in the galaxy. It is a sentence of cognitive death that precedes physical death by centuries, if not millennia. And yet, it is only number 4. Because in the end, the nails do offer one final dark mercy. The degradation eventually reduces the bearer's consciousness to something near animalistic. The suffering continues, but the understanding of that suffering, the memory of a life before the pain, finally fades. The fates that remain on our list are far crueler. They trap their victims in a prison of perfect, undiminished awareness, denying them even the release of going insane. And so we arrive at fate number 3, a punishment that leaves the slow, grinding self-erasure of the butcher's nails far behind and plunges us into a universe of explosive, body-twisting horror. This is the fate of those who gamble for godhood and lose. This is the fate of becoming a chaos spawn. To understand this particular nightmare, you have to understand the deal that every follower of chaos makes, whether they know it or not. The ruinous powers offer gifts, blessings, mutations that grant strength, resilience, and power beyond mortal limits. A champion of chaos is a walking testament to this divine favor, their body a canvas of blessed corruptions. They see these changes not as monstrous, but as steps on a sacred ladder, an ascension toward the ultimate prize, daemonhood. But the gods of the warp are fickle, and their gifts are poison. Each blessing is a drop of unstable energy, and eventually the vessel overflows. For every champion who successfully ascends to become an immortal daemon prince, there are thousands who fail. And failure isn't a simple death. Failure is spawndom. The transformation is not a gradual decline. It is a catastrophic biological detonation. One moment, you are a proud warrior, a chosen champion of the dark gods, feeling the power of the warp coursing through you. The next, that power turns on you. The warrior feels a sickening lurch as their own biology rebels. Bones snap and re-knit into new, impossible configurations. An arm withers and retracts into the torso, while 3 more burst from their back, clawed and useless. Eyes bubble to the surface of their skin in random clusters, each one seeing a different, distorted version of reality.
Their organs migrate, their flesh flows like hot wax, their mouth stretches into a permanent silent scream as their vocal cords are crushed and reformed into something that can only gurgle and shriek. And the entire time, the victim is conscious. This isn't the mercy of a quick, painful death. This is the agony of being disassembled and reassembled into a parody of life, while your mind, your own consciousness, is a helpless passenger for the entire ride. The victim feels every pop of sinew, every stretch of skin, every moment of their humanity dissolving into a tidal wave of mutating flesh. Their mind, which once held strategies, memories of glory, and the names of their gods, is flooded with incomprehensible sensory data from limbs that shouldn't exist and organs that serve no purpose. It is the definition of a living nightmare. What emerges from this biological apocalypse is a chaos spawn. A gibbering, writhing mountain of tissue, studded with random limbs, weeping orifices, and staring, unblinking eyes. They are no longer considered people. They are beasts, tools. Chaos warbands use them as living battering rams, unleashing them on enemy lines to soak up fire and cause terror before they are inevitably cut down or simply wander off to die.
They are the gods' ultimate cosmic joke, a testament to the fact that devotion means nothing, that ambition is a coin toss, and that your greatest dream can become your eternal physical hell at the whim of a laughing, malevolent deity. But here is where the true existential horror of this fate solidifies. What happens to the mind of the champion who underwent this transformation? Does it shatter under the strain, dissolving into the same mindless chaos as their body? Or does it persist? Is the warrior, the person they once were, still trapped somewhere inside that prison of mutated flesh? Aware, cognizant, but utterly unable to control the monstrous form that was once their body? The lore is deliberately, cruelly ambiguous. And it is in that uncertainty that this fate finds its place as number 3 on our list. Because while oblivion might be a mercy, the possibility of being a fully aware spectator to your own monstrous existence is a torment almost beyond reckoning. So, does the mind break? Does the champion's consciousness mercifully shatter into a million pieces, granting them the oblivion of animal instinct? The comforting answer is yes. The grimdark answer, the one supported by terrifying anecdotal evidence from across the galaxy, is a resounding no. The person is still in there, and they are screaming. Inquisitorial field reports and the blasphemous chronicles of chaos warbands are littered with unsettling accounts. A spawn, in the heat of battle, has been witnessed throwing its misshapen body in front of a Chaos Lord, shielding its former commander from a killing blow, an act of loyalty that makes no sense for a mindless beast. Vox thieves have captured their shrieks and, when slowed down and filtered, found fragments of Gothic, broken syllables of names and places from a life long gone.
Most disturbingly, there are verified pict captures of spawn that appear to be weeping, their multiple eyes leaking viscous fluid in a display of sorrow that serves no biological or tactical purpose whatsoever. The consciousness, it seems, endures. Now try to imagine what that existence is like. You are a soul trapped in a biological riot. You have eyes on your back, but all they show you is a nauseating upside-down blur. You have 3 arms on one side, but you can't command them. They twitch and grasp at nothing. You try to remember your wife's face, but your brain is being flooded with the scent of ozone from an organ you didn't have 5 minutes ago. You try to call out for help, to scream your own name to prove you still exist, but the thing that was once your mouth can only vomit a guttural roar. Your body is a prison, and every second is a new and unique sensory torture. You are a passenger in a runaway train made of your own flesh. This internal nightmare is then compounded by external humiliation. Your former brothers in arms, the warriors you fought beside, no longer see you as an equal. To them, you are now a pet, a mascot. The warband's champion might even keep you on a chain, affectionately calling you by your old name. "Good old Vorlag," he'll say, patting a quivering mound of flesh. "Still eager for a fight, aren't you, boy?" He'll toss you a slab of meat, and you will watch, helpless, as your monstrous body devours it raw. The man who was once your rival now treats you like his dog, and you are aware of every single condescending moment. When the fighting starts, it gets worse. Your body is unleashed, a living weapon propelled by raw instinct and warp energy. You feel a surge of alien adrenaline as you crash into a line of Imperial guardsmen. You watch through your own eyes as claws you don't control tear a man in half. The man who was once your rival now treats you like his dog, and you are aware of every single condescending moment. When the fighting starts, it gets worse. Your body is unleashed, a living weapon propelled by raw instinct and warp energy. You feel a surge of alien adrenaline as you crash into a line of Imperial guardsmen. You watch through your own eyes as claws you don't control tear a man in half. You feel the hot spray of his blood, and you sense a part of your new form reveling in the slaughter, even as your trapped soul recoils in absolute horror. You are committing atrocities, and you can't even close your eyes. And this doesn't end. The same chaotic energies that wrought your hideous transformation also sustain you. There is no dying of old age. There is no guarantee of a clean death in battle. Some spawn have been sighted that are rumored to be thousands of years old, their bodies still shifting, still mutating, their torment a continuous, unending state of being. They are eternal failures, living monuments to the mockery of their gods, fully aware of what they've lost and what they've become. To truly understand the horror of becoming a chaos spawn, you have to understand that it is not an accident. It is a punchline. It is the final, agonizingly cruel joke played by gods who find mortal ambition to be the most hilarious thing in the cosmos. These transformations are not a bug in the system of demonic boons. They are a deliberately designed feature. Think of the person who becomes a spawn. They were not some random victim. They were a champion, a warrior who actively sought the favor of the Ruinous Powers. They walked the path to glory, willingly accepting mutations as proof of their god's attention. When a tentacle sprouted from their shoulder, they saw it as a blessing. When their skin hardened into chitin, they believed they were ascending. They performed sacrifices, spilled rivers of blood, and offered up their soul with the fervent belief that they were on the verge of becoming a god themselves, a glorious daemon prince. They saw the finish line. They believed they were chosen. And then, at a moment of a god's choosing, perhaps at the height of their victory or in a quiet moment of self-satisfaction, the gifts turn sour, the blessings curdle. The accumulating power reaches a critical mass, and their body loses all cohesion, collapsing into a writhing, cancerous mass of flesh. The deepest cruelty is that the chaos gods could stop this. They have the power to guide the transformation, to ensure it results in a stable, powerful form. They simply choose not to. A spawn is created when a god grows bored, when a champion's particular brand of devotion ceases to be amusing, or, most terrifyingly, when the god decides that this champion's eternal, mindless agony is a more fitting reward than daemonhood. It is punishment for failure, but the definition of failure is entirely subject to the whims of an insane deity. The exact same acts of devotion, the same bloody sacrifices that elevate one warrior to the status of a daemon prince, will doom another to the shambling horror of spawndom. There is no logic, there is no justice, there is only the capricious, mocking laughter of thirsting gods. If that trapped consciousness does indeed survive, its existence is defined by this single, unbearable memory, the moment of ultimate failure. A daemon prince remembers their ascension, the glorious instant they shed their mortal shell and were embraced by divinity. A conscious spawn remembers the opposite. It remembers the moment its ambition was rejected, the moment its dreams of godhood dissolved into a biological nightmare. It exists as a living monument to failure, a constant reminder to every other chaos worshipper in its warband. This could be you. Your devotion means nothing. Your sacrifices might be worthless. You are one bad day away from becoming this. Chaos Lords will often keep flocks of these creatures, herds of former warriors who all failed their patrons. And in the grim darkness of the far future, irony is never in short supply. It's not uncommon for these flocks to contain individuals who were once bitter rivals, who spent their lives competing for the same god's favor. Now, they exist side by side, equally degraded, their brand competition rendered utterly meaningless. If they are aware, they might even recognize each other. The twitch of a vestigial limb, the pattern on a patch of scales, and know with silent, screaming certainty that they are trapped in the exact same hell. They can't speak. They can't commiserate. They can only share in the divine mockery. This is why it's our number 3. Because as horrifying as it is, there remains a sliver of doubt about consciousness, and a physical body, no matter how resilient, can still be destroyed. The final 2 fates on our list will offer no such mercies. We now arrive at the second worst fate in the galaxy, a torment so profound that it makes the chaotic agony of a chaos spawn seem like a mercy. This is a fate not born of a god's random mockery, but of cold, calculated human ingenuity. This is the horror of becoming a daemon host. It is vital to understand that this is not the same as simple demonic possession. A normal possession is a messy, temporary affair. A daemon forces its way into a mortal body, burns it out like a cheap battery, and is either exorcised or discards the corpse when it's done. It is brutal, but it ends. A daemon host is different. A daemon host is permanent. It is a prison with 2 inmates, one mortal, one daemon, fused together in a living cage from which neither can escape. And who are the architects of this particular hell? Not the heretics, not the traitors. This nightmare is the work of the holy ordos of the Inquisition. In their endless war against the demonic, they decided that the best way to fight fire was to capture it, bottle it, and chain it to a human soul. They create daemon hosts as living weapons, controllable fonts of warp power. The process begins with a subject, usually a captured psyker or a condemned heretic deemed strong enough to withstand the initial shock. They are not asked for their consent. They are strapped to a ritual slab, surrounded by arcane machinery and chanting inquisitorial acolytes. They are fully conscious as the binding ritual begins. They feel the barriers of reality thin. They feel a presence approach, something ancient and vast and utterly alien. And then it enters them. Not like a physical blow, but like a psychic tide flooding every corner of their mind. One survivor, in a moment of lucidity, described it as being embraced by a glacier. Not an act of malice, but of absolute, crushing indifference. The victim feels the daemon's consciousness settle into their own, an entity older than human civilization, now sharing their thoughts, their memories, their very soul. It is a violation so complete that the mind has no framework to process it. But the true, engineered cruelty of the daemon host is in the nature of the binding itself. The intricate wards and psychic chains that hold the daemon are not anchored to the daemon. They are anchored to the host's human soul. This means the host cannot be suppressed. They cannot be allowed to fall into a coma or have their consciousness erased. For the prison to function, the prisoner must remain awake and aware. Their continued consciousness is a structural requirement. They are the living lock on their own cell. So they remain, a fully aware passenger in their own body, sharing every waking moment with a creature of raw chaos that views their existence as a temporary inconvenience at best and a fascinating new toy at worst. The host's life is over. Their sentence has just begun. The daily existence of a daemon host is a masterclass in psychological torture, refined over millennia by entities for whom cruelty is a form of conversation. The host's mind is no longer a private sanctuary. It is a shared space, and their roommate is a predator. The daemon does not simply sit in the corner. It rummages. It explores every memory with the casual, invasive curiosity of a thief going through a stranger's home. It finds the host's most cherished moments, the memory of a first love, the pride of a past achievement, the face of a lost family member. And it doesn't just observe them, it corrupts them. It whispers new details into the scene, twisting joy into mockery, turning love into a source of shame. A fond memory of a parent's embrace is suddenly tainted with the daemon's commentary on their mortality, their insignificance, their eventual decay into dust. And it never, ever stops talking. The voice is a constant presence in the host's consciousness. There is no volume control. There is no off switch. Sometimes it's a roar of cosmic hatred that threatens to shatter the host's sanity. Other times, it's a soft, reasonable whisper, which is infinitely worse. Daemons are ancient, and they are masters of manipulation. They learn their host's breaking points, not to shatter them, but to leverage them. "You are so tired," the daemon will suggest, its voice dripping with false sympathy. "You fight so hard. Just let me take control for a little while. You can rest. I will grant you a few moments of perfect, blissful silence. What is 1 hour of your life in exchange for peace?" The host knows it's a lie. They know every inch of ground ceded is lost forever. But the temptation, day after day, year after year, grinds down the will to resist. The choice between endless, agonizing resistance and the promise of a single moment's relief becomes the most difficult decision in the universe, a decision they must make 1,000 times a day. Then there is the physical horror. When the daemon host's inquisitorial master decides to unleash their weapon, the host is not simply suppressed. They are forced to watch. They feel their bones crack and reshape. They feel their skin split as horns and claws erupt from their flesh. They watch through their own eyes as their hands, now twisted into monstrous weapons, tear apart soldiers of the Imperium they may have once sworn to protect. And they feel the daemon's reaction. They feel the raw, ecstatic pleasure it takes in destruction, a wave of alien joy that floods their shared consciousness. The host becomes a participant in their own defilement, feeling the hot spray of blood on a face they no longer recognize, sensing the daemon's glee as it feasts on the terror of its victims. And when the battle is over, when the binding rituals are reinforced and the daemon is chained once more, the host is left with the after-image. The memories of the atrocities are now their memories. The psychic echo of the daemon's elation lingers, a disgusting stain on their soul. They are left to process the fact that they have done things no human should ever do, and a part of them, the alien part, enjoyed it. Inquisitorial records, for all their cold detachment, contain fragments of this torment. One daemon host, during a brief moment of lucidity, described the experience as being digested very slowly from the inside out. Another, during a dangerous binding renewal ceremony, did not scream or fight, but simply begged to be killed, a plea that was noted and promptly denied. The weapon was still too useful. A third simply repeated the same phrase over and over until the daemon's consciousness overwhelmed them again. "It's still talking. It never stops talking. Please, for the Emperor's sake, make it stop talking." What truly elevates daemon host possession into the upper echelons of cosmic horror, landing it squarely at the number 2 spot, is its designed permanence. This isn't a temporary affliction. It's an endless sentence. The binding rituals used by the Inquisition are not just to trap a daemon within a host. They are engineered to create a perfect, inescapable prison for both parties. Every escape route a sane mind might conjure has been anticipated and ruthlessly sealed off. The host cannot commit suicide. Should they try to end their own life, the daemon, bound to the flesh and desperate to preserve its own vessel in real space, will seize control. It will force the host's own hands to stop the bleeding, to reset the bone, to keep the heart beating through what should be lethal damage. The host is denied even the final, desperate agency of their own death. The daemon, in turn, cannot simply leave. The intricate wards and sigils carved into the host's very soul anchor it to the material plane, preventing its retreat into the warp. It is as much a prisoner as the human it torments. And what of rescue? What of exorcism? The Inquisition, in its terrible wisdom, has accounted for that too. The bindings are woven so deeply into the host's metaphysical being that any attempt to perform an exorcism would be like trying to remove a person's skeleton while keeping them alive. The ritual would not banish the demon, it would shatter the host's soul, likely killing the exorcist in a backlash of raw, unholy power. The only way to truly end a demon host's existence is through complete and utter physical annihilation. A direct hit from a Titan's volcano cannon, perhaps, or the heart of a star. And given their utility as inquisitorial assets, they are rarely put in a position where such a final end is likely. So the sentence continues. Not for days or years, but for decades, centuries. Over this unimaginable timescale, the war for the host's mind becomes a slow, grinding erosion. The demon doesn't need to win in a single glorious battle, it just needs to persist. The host's consciousness, their very identity, is slowly compressed. It's like a room where the walls are closing in, millimeter by millimeter, over 100 years. The host doesn't die, they remain aware. But their awareness becomes smaller, more limited, a tiny flickering candle in a hurricane of demonic will. They go from being a combatant in a shared mind to a terrified spectator, and then, finally, to a prisoner in a forgotten corner of their own skull. The final state, for those who have endured for centuries, is a horror beyond words. The original human is little more than a fragment, a mote of dust trapped in amber. They are a single, terrified thought, surrounded on all sides by the vast, alien consciousness of the daemon. They can no longer see through their eyes or hear through their ears. All they perceive is the overwhelming, crushing presence of the entity that has consumed them. They are still there. They are still aware that they exist, but that is all they are.
An existence of pure, unadulterated, eternal fear. This is the second worst fate in the galaxy, because, in theory, it can end. After millennia, the bindings might decay. The host might finally be consumed entirely, their last flicker of awareness extinguished. The daemon host might, one day, be destroyed in some great cataclysm. There is an endpoint, however theoretical, however impossibly distant. It is the faintest glimmer of mercy in an ocean of torment. A mercy that our number one spot will utterly and eternally deny. And so we arrive at the summit, the absolute apex of torment in a galaxy built from it. The number one fate worse than death. The previous 9 entries on this list, from the penal legions to the daemon hosts, were all defined by a specific kind of horror. But they all shared one thing, a theoretical endpoint, a possibility, however remote, of cessation. This final fate offers no such mercy. There is no escape. There is no end. There is only the throne.
The most profound and cruel irony in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe is this. The single most important being in the Imperium, the figurehead worshipped as a living god by uncounted trillions, the entity upon whom the very survival of the human race depends, exists in a state of perpetual, unimaginable suffering that eclipses every other horror we have discussed. The one they call the Master of Mankind is, and has been for 10,000 years, the galaxy's single greatest victim. His name is the Emperor, and his fate is to sit upon the golden throne. To understand this, we have to go back to the very end of the Horus Heresy. On the bridge of the vengeful spirit, the Emperor confronted his favored son, the corrupted War Master Horus. In the cataclysmic battle that followed, Horus dealt the Emperor a series of wounds so grievous, so spiritually and physically devastating, that not even the Emperor's own superhuman biology and psychic might could heal them.
He was, for all intents and purposes, mortally wounded. As he lay dying, his last loyal son, Rogel Dorn, carried his broken body back to Terra. To preserve what little remained, to keep the flickering flame of his life from being extinguished, the Emperor was interred within the arcane machinery of the Golden Throne. This was not a choice made for comfort. It was a desperate act of triage on a civilizational scale. The throne is not a life support system in the way we might understand it. It is a monstrously complex piece of ancient technology that serves 3 vital, galaxy-spanning functions. First, it sustains the Emperor's ruined biological form. Second, its mechanisms allow his still active mind to project the psychic beacon of the Astromicon, the lighthouse that makes interstellar travel possible for the Imperium. And third, his immense psychic will holds shut a catastrophic breach into the webway deep beneath the Imperial Palace, a gate that, if left unguarded, would unleash a tide of demons that would consume Terra itself. The throne is a vast Baroque engine of gold and adamantium, a mountain of humming machinery and Gothic architecture fused directly into the Emperor's decaying form. His body, what's left of it, is little more than a corpse animated by arcane science and sheer force of will. His skin is desiccated parchment stretched over a skeletal frame. His organs are sustained by a constant, grotesque transfusion of psychically potent fluids and the very souls of sacrificed psychers. His eyes are hollow sockets, unseeing. His mouth is frozen, unable to speak a single word. He is a cadaver king, a silent, enthroned relic at the heart of a galactic empire. And here is the final, soul-crushing turn of the knife. He is conscious. He is aware. Through the ruin of his body, behind the unseeing eyes, the Emperor's mind, the most powerful psychic consciousness humanity has ever produced, is wide awake. He has been awake for 10,000 years. He has experienced every single second of his agonizing, unchanging internment.
He feels the decay of his own flesh, the constant grinding pain of his unhealed wounds, and the ceaseless draining effort of his duties. His service is not a passive state. It is an active, eternal agony. Let's dissect the physical reality of this torment. The Golden Throne sustains the Emperor, but it does not and cannot heal him. The catastrophic injuries inflicted by Horus Lupercal are not memories. They are an ongoing, present-tense reality. For 10,000 years, the Emperor has felt the phantom, yet perfectly real sensation of his back being broken. He feels the superheated metal of Horus's talon tearing through his flesh, the bioalchemical poisons coursing through a circulatory system that no longer truly exists. His nervous system, kept functional by arcane machinery, continues to send the same signals of absolute world-ending agony to his brain that it did in the final moments of the heresy. The pain is not a dull ache that has faded with time. It is a fresh, screaming, and all-consuming fire that has not diminished by 1 iota in 100 centuries. His body is a ruin, and his consciousness is trapped inside it, forced to experience its own destruction on a continuous loop. This state of decay requires a constant, horrifying source of fuel. Daily, 1,000 psychers, culled from the black ships, are brought before the throne and sacrificed. Their souls are siphoned from their bodies and fed directly into the machine, and by extension, into the Emperor himself. He feels this. He experiences the influx of 1,000 dying minds every single day. Imagine the psychic shriek of a soul being extinguished, the terror and despair of a conscious being reduced to raw energy. Now imagine that sound, that feeling, multiplied by 1,000, flooding your own consciousness in a tidal wave of anguish. It is a torrent of death that he is forced to consume just to continue his own state of undeath. Whether this provides a moment of relief or is simply another layer of torment is a question for theologians, but the experience is undeniable. He is sustained by the psychic death cries of his own people. Then there is the throne itself. It is not a gentle, passive support system. It is an invasive, parasitic machine. Its tendrils and conduits are fused directly into what remains of the Emperor's spine and nervous system. It is a crude and brutal interface that actively and painfully draws his immense psychic power out of him. He feels the constant, draining pull as his will is siphoned away to power the Astronomican and hold back the demonic legions in the webway. It is the sensation of being perpetually leeched, of having your very essence drawn out of you against your will. A spiritual exsanguination that never ends because the machine keeps your heart beating just long enough to drain you again tomorrow. The sheer scale of this physical suffering is so immense that it bleeds out into reality itself. Those few who are granted the privilege of entering the Sanctum Imperialis, the throne room itself, describe an atmosphere heavy with pressure, a psychic weight that can crush the mind. The air is said to taste of ozone, dust, and old blood. Custodians who have stood vigil for centuries speak of a constant low-level psychic hum of pure, concentrated pain. Pilgrims who have traveled a lifetime just to be in his presence are often driven mad by the briefest exposure to the psychic emanation of his agony. His suffering is not contained to his broken body. It is a force of nature that has saturated the very stone and metal of his prison, a perpetual storm of torment at the very heart of the Imperium. If the physical torment is a fire consuming his body, the psychic burden is a star collapsing within his mind. The two are inseparable, feeding each other in a perfect, horrifying loop. For 10 millennia, the Emperor's consciousness has been stretched to perform two tasks, either of which would annihilate the soul of any other being in existence. First, there is the Astronometican. It is not merely a light. It is a focused projection of the Emperor's own psychic will, a beacon of order and sanity broadcast across 100,000 light-years of the galaxy. It is the lighthouse that allows humanity's ships to navigate the insane, predator-filled tides of the warp. To power it, his mind must remain coherent, focused, and powerful enough to pierce the veil of reality across unimaginable distances. The strain is constant and incalculable. A choir of 10,000 astropaths, powerful psychers in their own right, are needed just to focus and shape his broadcast, and their lifespans are measured in a few short, agonizing years before they burn out. The Emperor has been the raw power behind that broadcast, without interruption, for 10,000 years. It is the equivalent of holding a single, perfect note with your voice, loud enough to be heard across a solar system and never stopping to breathe. Simultaneously, he fights a second, secret war. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, a wound in reality festers. During the Age of Strife, the Emperor had begun constructing his own passage into the alien webway, a network that would have freed humanity from the dangers of warp travel forever. That project failed catastrophically, and what remains is a gaping, uncontrolled gateway, a direct path for the legions of chaos to pour onto the throne world. The only thing holding it shut is the Emperor's will. While one part of his mind projects the Astronomicon across the galaxy, another part is locked in a desperate, unending psychic war. He is a living seal, a psychic dam holding back an ocean of demons. He feels them pressing against his defenses, hears their whispers, feels their hatred, and fights them back, moment by moment, second by second. He cannot rest. He cannot falter. If his concentration slips for even a fraction of a second, Terra, the heart of the Imperium, will be devoured. This is his existence, a two-front war fought entirely within the battlefield of his own mind. He must simultaneously be a galaxy-spanning lighthouse and an unbreakable fortress wall. And while he performs these impossible labors, his mind, his consciousness, is not numb. It is aware. And it sees everything. Stretched across the Imperium, he sustains. He perceives the reality of what his creation has become. He sees the ecclesiarchy, a monolithic church built on the blind worship he explicitly forbade, its priests screaming prayers to a god that never wanted to be one. He sees the Inquisition, his secret police, torturing and murdering billions in his name, twisting his ideals into a doctrine of paranoia and oppression. He watches as his dream of a secular, rational, scientific human empire has rotted into a superstitious, ignorant, and decaying theocracy that fears technology and persecutes knowledge. He is forced to watch his grand vision die and to power its grotesque, shambling corpse with his own life force. He sees the endless suffering of his people. He feels the psychic echo of their fear and their misplaced faith. And he knows that he is the battery powering the very system that creates it. His eternal vigil is not a noble sacrifice. It is the ultimate cosmic irony. He is the prisoner, the warden, and the power source for his own failed utopia. For 10,000 years, the Emperor has had time to think, time to remember. And his memories are a failure and loss on a scale no other being has ever known. He remembers his sons, not as the demigods of imperial propaganda, but as the children he engineered in his gene labs, the companions he designed to share his burden and carry his vision into the stars. And he remembers how he lost them. He remembers Horus Lupercal, his war master, his most beloved son, the one he trusted above all others. And he remembers the moment on the vengeful spirit when he was forced to obliterate Horus's soul, an act of patricide that saved the Imperium but broke its father. That single moment of agonizing necessity has been replaying in his mind for 100 centuries.
He remembers Sanguinius, the perfect, angelic son, broken and dead at Horus's feet. He remembers Ferrus Manus, beheaded. He remembers the loyal sons who vanished into the void, and the traitor sons who gave themselves to damnation. They were his greatest creation, and they became his greatest failure. He feels the weight of their betrayal and their loss not as ancient history, but as a fresh, weeping wound that will never be allowed to scar over. He sits on his throne of torment, the ultimate patriarch, having outlived or been forced to destroy the very children for whom he built his empire. Worse even than the loss of his family is the corruption of his dream. The emperor's entire life's work was the establishment of the imperial truth, a secular, rationalist empire for humanity, guided by science and reason, free from the shackles of superstition and the tyranny of faith. He fought a crusade to tear down the idols of false gods and liberate humanity from the lies of priests.
And now he is the silent, unwilling centerpiece of the largest and most oppressive religion in galactic history. His name is the foundation of the imperial creed. His image is the idol worshipped on 1,000,000 worlds. The ecclesiarchy, the monolithic church that he would have dismantled with extreme prejudice, now speaks for him, using his authority to enforce ignorance and justify atrocity. Every prayer uttered in his name is a psychic scream of everything he fought against. Every cathedral built in his honor is a monument to his utter, comprehensive failure. He is forced to watch, to psychically perceive, as his grand vision of an enlightened humanity has rotted into a superstitious, xenophobic, and decaying theocracy that actively persecutes the very progress he championed. And this is the core of the cruelty, the detail that elevates his suffering to its own unique tier of hell. A dead martyr is merely a symbol, blissfully unaware of how their legacy is twisted. A mindless, comatose patient feels nothing. But the emperor is not dead, and he is not mindless. He is aware. He is lucid. He is conscious of every prayer, every atrocity, every lie told in his name. His survival is not a blessing. It is the condition of his torture. It ensures he has a front-row seat to the desecration of his own life's work, and he is powerless to stop it. He cannot speak. He cannot correct the lies. He cannot guide the flock that worships him. He is the most revered being in the galaxy, and he is also the most isolated. For 10,000 years, he has been a voiceless, captive god, surrounded by trillions of worshippers, yet completely and utterly alone with the agonizing knowledge of his own defeat. The physical and emotional torment of the emperor is a horror of human experience scaled up to divine proportions. But the spiritual horror of the Golden Throne is something else entirely. It transcends the familiar agonies of flesh and mind and enters a realm of metaphysical violation so profound it is almost impossible to comprehend. It begins with a daily ritual, a sacrament of damnation. Every day, for 10,000 years, 1,000 psychers are brought before the throne and sacrificed. Their souls are not released to the warp, nor are they granted the emperor's peace. They are siphoned, drained, and fed directly into the arcane machinery that sustains the master of mankind. They are his fuel. The emperor, in his eternal awareness, experiences this. He feels the life force of 1,000 terrified, unwilling souls being consumed to keep his own decaying heart beating for one more day. The question that haunts the most radical inquisitorial scholars is, what happens to those souls? The most terrifying theories suggest they are not merely annihilated. They are absorbed. Their consciousness, their memories, their final moments of screaming terror are added to the maelstrom of the Emperor's own mind. If this is true, then after 10 millennia, the Emperor's consciousness is no longer his own. It is a psychic gestalt, a composite being containing the fragmented, agonized echoes of the more than 3.5 billion souls he has been forced to consume. He is a living ghost story, a haunted house of a mind, containing a chorus of the devoured who have no escape, trapped inside the same prison as their god. This constant influx of agony, this 10,000-year exposure to the raw energies of the warp while fighting a never-ending war against it, cannot leave a soul unchanged, not even one as powerful as the Emperor's. The being on the Golden Throne today is not the same man who was interred there after the Siege of Terra. The sheer, unrelenting pressure has to be forging him into something new, something other. Like a star collapsing under its own gravity, the Emperor's soul is being compressed into a new state of existence, one defined by stagnant order, endless duty, and unimaginable suffering. This has led to the most heretical theory of all, whispered only in the most secure vaults of the Inquisition, that the worship of trillions and the agony of 10 millennia are causing the Emperor to ascend, not as a savior, but as a new chaos god. A fifth power in the warp, an entity of tyranny, stasis, and sacrifice, the dark mirror of the other four. If this is true, the Emperor might one day find release from his prison, but only by becoming a monster of cosmic proportions, his original personality and goals utterly annihilated, replaced by a new god born from his pain. His final victory would be his ultimate defeat. But perhaps the most spiritually devastating aspect of his fate is the one that grants him the most agency. Some believe the Emperor could die. That if he simply gave up, relaxed his will for a single instant, the Golden Throne would fail, the Astronomicanon would go dark, the demons beneath Terra would be unleashed, and his long agony would finally end. If this is true, then his suffering is not a sentence, but a choice he has to make every single second of every single day for 10,000 years. He is eternally tempted with the release of oblivion, knowing that to accept it would be to condemn the entire human species to extinction. His fate is not just to suffer, but to actively, consciously, and perpetually choose to suffer, holding the blade to his own throat for the sake of a species that has forgotten him and corrupted everything he ever stood for. And so we arrive at the absolute apex of agony, the final and most terrible fate in a galaxy built on torment. The reason the Emperor's suffering sits at the pinnacle of this list is not because it is merely one more form of pain, but because it is all of them, combined, amplified, and made eternal. It is the synthesis of every horror we have explored, perfected into a state of damnation from which there is no escape, not even in theory. First, consider the duration. 10,000 years. It is a span of time the human mind cannot properly grasp. Entire civilizations have risen and fallen on Terra in less time. The homunculus grows bored after a few centuries. The soul in the furnace eventually fades to oblivion over millennia. The demon host is, after an age of torment, finally consumed. Their sentences, however horrific, have an endpoint. The Emperor's does not. He has been conscious, aware, and in agony for 100 centuries, and there is no indication that the 101st will be any different. His existence is a geological age of pain, a timescale of suffering so vast it renders every other fate on this list a fleeting, almost merciful ordeal. Then there is the perfect, inescapable nature of his prison. A penal legionnaire can dream of a stray bullet. An arcoflagellant's body will eventually fail. A homunculus victim can be rescued, or their tormentor might be killed. There is always a sliver of possibility, a mathematical chance of release. The Emperor has none. He cannot die, because his death would extinguish the Astronomecon, plunging humanity into a darkness from which it would never emerge. The demonic legions waiting beneath the imperial palace would erupt onto Terra, devouring the throne world. His death means the death of his species. He cannot be healed, for the technology to repair his grievous wounds was lost an eternity ago, if it ever existed at all. He cannot be replaced. No other being in the galaxy possesses the psychic might to hold back the tide of chaos and light the way for humanity simultaneously. His prison is not built of stone and steel, but of love and duty. Every soul he protects is another bar on his cage. But the final, most cruel element, the one that elevates this beyond all other torments, is the element of choice. The Emperor's suffering is not entirely passive. According to the most sacred and secret tenets of the imperial faith, he could choose to let go. He could relax his will, silence his mind, and embrace the oblivion he has been denied for 10 millennia. In any given second, he could choose to end it all. This transforms his fate from a sentence to a continuous act of self-immolation. Every moment is a fresh decision to endure the unendurable. Every breath sustained by the throne's machinery is a new acceptance of his agony. He is not merely a victim. He is an active participant in his own eternal crucifixion, holding the nails in place with his own psychic will. Because the alternative is to abandon the species for which he has already sacrificed everything. This is why his fate is the worst. It is the combination of infinite duration, absolute inescapability, and the psychological devastation of choosing your own torment, over and over, forever. He is the ultimate expression of the video's opening image, the warrior suspended in time, his consciousness a prisoner. But he is a creator who cannot create, a father who cannot speak to his children, a rationalist forced to watch his secular dream curdled into a fanatic theocracy that worships his name. He is a god locked in a corpse, aware of every passing second of his failure, unable to fight, unable to rest, unable to die, sustaining it all for an age beyond comprehension. So, we've made it through the list. We've explored 10 distinct flavors of cosmic agony, from the grinding, hopeless attrition of a penal legion to the 10,000-year crucifixion of the Emperor himself. But it's worth taking a step back to ask, what's the common denominator here? What's the thematic through line that connects all of these horrors and elevates them beyond a simple, clean death? Because the architects of torment in this universe, whether they're imperial priests or dark Eldar artists, all follow the same basic 4-part recipe for creating a fate worse than death. The first and most crucial ingredient is consciousness. Suffering requires a witness. There is no point, from a cosmic perspective, in torturing a corpse. The chaos gods don't get their psychic sustenance from someone who isn't aware of their own pain. The ecclesiarchy doesn't see redemption in the toil of a mindless machine. So, the 40K universe has mastered the art of keeping the lights on long after any sane biology would have shut them down. The arcoflagellant remains aware inside their frenzied body. The daemon host is a conscious prisoner in their own skull. The Emperor is agonizingly, impossibly aware of every passing second. This isn't an accident. In a cosmos where anguish is a tangible resource, destroying a victim's mind is like burning your crops. It's just mad business. The second ingredient is duration, specifically indefinite duration. The human mind is remarkably resilient. We can endure almost anything if we know it will eventually end. There's a reason real-world psychological studies on prisoners show that an indefinite sentence is exponentially more damaging than a finite one, even if the finite sentence is longer. It's the absence of a finish line that shatters the psyche. The fates on this list are not just painful, they are endless. They remove the concept of getting through it because there is no through. The penal legionnaire doesn't have a release date. The homunculus victim's torment ends only when the artist gets bored, which might be in 1,000 years. The emperor's vigil has no conceivable conclusion. This transforms suffering from an event into a state of being. It's no longer something you are experiencing, it is what you are. Third, there is isolation. Every one of these fates is a prison of one. The victims are hermetically sealed within their own torment, unable to communicate their experience to anyone who could offer comfort or understanding. A servitor with retained consciousness might be surrounded by people, but it cannot speak, cannot cry out, cannot signal the person trapped inside. The souls in a dark mechanicum furnace can sense millions of others, but they are all screaming the same silent scream. The emperor is surrounded by the worship of trillions, but he is utterly alone with his burden, unable to correct the dogma, unable to explain his sacrifice, unable to connect. This profound loneliness ensures that the suffering is never shared, never diluted. It's a weight that each victim must bear entirely on their own. But the final ingredient, the one that truly cements these fates as worse than death, is the deliberate and systematic annihilation of hope. Hope is the mind's immune system. It's the mechanism that allows us to endure the present by focusing on a better future. And the cruelest powers in the 40K universe understand this. They don't just inflict pain, they perform a kind of spiritual surgery to excise any possibility of relief. The explosive collar on a legionnaire isn't just a tool of control, it's a guarantee that even the hope of a quick death is not yours to control. The demon host can't be exorcised, the emperor cannot be healed. Hope is specifically identified and targeted for destruction because a hopeless victim suffers more completely. A victim with even a sliver of hope is a victim who is still fighting back, even if only in their own mind. And in the grim darkness of the far future, that is a luxury you will not be afforded. And that brings us to the most unsettling realization of all. These 10 fates, this gallery of horrors we've just walked through, they aren't aberrations. They aren't statistical outliers in an otherwise reasonable galaxy. They are the logical, inevitable products of the universe they exist in. They're not bugs in the system, they are the system's most refined features. The truth is, the entire Warhammer 40,000 cosmos is a living engine of torment, an ecosystem designed from the ground up to produce exactly these kinds of outcomes. At the heart of it all is the warp. It isn't just an alternate dimension for faster-than-light travel. It's a psychic ocean that reflects the emotions of every living, thinking creature in the galaxy. And it has developed a very specific appetite. The chaos gods, the great predators of that ocean, feed on emotion. Khorne feeds on rage, Tzeentch on ambition, Nurgle on despair, and Slaanesh on excess. But all of them, in their own way, are sustained by suffering. Pain, terror, anguish. These aren't just byproducts of existence. They are the galaxy's most abundant natural resource. This creates a horrifying feedback loop. The more a species suffers, the more powerful the gods become. And the more powerful the gods become, the more they warp reality to generate even more suffering. The universe has, in effect, evolved to maximize its own cruelty, because that cruelty is what fuels its masters. And don't for a second think this is just a chaos problem. That's the easy, comforting lie. The single greatest suffering generator in the entire galaxy might just be humanity's own Imperium. Look back at our list. Penal Legion service? That's imperial justice. Archoflagellation? That's the ecclesiarchy's idea of redemption. Servitor conversion? That's the mechanicum solution to a labor shortage. The psychic sacrifices to the Astronomicon and the Golden Throne? That is the holy foundational policy that keeps the entire Imperium from collapsing. Humanity built its shield against the horrors of the galaxy, and it did so by creating a system that perpetrates those very same horrors on its own people, just with more paperwork and religious justification. The Imperium isn't fighting the darkness. It's just another flavor of it, one that happens to wear our face. So the question everyone always asks is there any hope? Is there any light in this suffocating darkness? And the answer is complicated. Yes, of course, there are moments. A guardsman holds the line against impossible odds. A space marine sacrifices himself to save 1 billion souls. Two friends share a moment of peace in a trench before a battle they both know they won't survive. These moments are real and they are powerful, but they are a candle in a cosmic hurricane. The fundamental structure of the universe is actively, violently hostile to hope. The best possible outcomes in this setting still involve levels of suffering that would break us, and the worst outcomes are the ones we've just spent this entire video exploring. This leaves every thinking being in the galaxy with a terrible philosophical choice. What does it mean to be good, to be moral, in a universe that is fundamentally rigged to punish existence itself? The factions have all come up with their own broken answers. The Imperium chose blind, fanatical faith. Believe your suffering serves a higher purpose, and burn anyone who says otherwise. The followers of chaos chose cynical exploitation. If the universe is a slaughterhouse, it's better to be the butcher than the cattle. Many Space Marine chapters have landed on a kind of stoic, nihilistic duty. There is no victory, there is only the war. They fight because it's what they were made to do, and they will continue until they are destroyed. And then you have races like the Eldar, locked in a state of desperate, elegant resistance, trying to outwit a game they know they've already lost. None of these are good answers, but in a galaxy built for torment, they're the only answers there are. So, after all of that, after 10,000 years of agony on a golden chair, after being turned into a living battery, after having your mind erased by a nail in your skull, you have to ask the question, why are we here? Why do we, as an audience, willingly dive headfirst into a universe that is so profoundly, ingeniously miserable? What is it about these fates, these stories of torment without end, that draws millions of us in? It's a legitimate question. On paper, it sounds like the most depressing hobby imaginable. And yet, here we are. I think part of the answer is a kind of psychological catharsis. We are all, on some level, afraid of the same things. We fear losing control of our own bodies, our own minds. We fear our identity being stripped away. We fear suffering without purpose, and we fear being trapped in a system with no hope of escape. The fates in Warhammer 40,000 are simply these universal human anxieties turned up to a cosmic theatrical extreme. When we watch an archoflagellant lose control, we're engaging with our fear of helplessness in a safe fictional context. When we learn about a servitor with a trapped consciousness, we're exploring our fear of losing our identity, of becoming just a tool. By confronting these horrors in a story, we get to process them, to touch the void without falling in. It's a psychological workout for our deepest anxieties. There's also a strange kind of comfort to be found in the sheer, overwhelming scale of the suffering. There's a dark, cynical perspective that 40K provides that no other setting really can. Having a bad day at work? Your boss is a tyrant? Well, at least he's not a homunculus preparing to turn you into a screaming chair for the next 5 centuries. Feeling stuck in a rut? At least you're not a penal legionnaire whose only hope for release is to be blown apart by the explosive collar around your neck. It sounds morbid, and it is, but there's a genuine psychological relief in imagining a reality so much worse than our own that it makes our own problems feel, by comparison, utterly manageable.
It's the ultimate "it could be worse" scenario, written across an entire galaxy.
But I think the deepest reason we're drawn to this darkness is a bit more complicated. Most fiction, especially mainstream fantasy and sci-fi, ultimately tries to sell you on the idea of hope. It tells you that good will triumph, that sacrifice will be rewarded, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's a fine story. But for a lot of us, it can feel dishonest. It doesn't always line up with the world we see around us. The 40K universe, in its own ridiculously over-the-top way, feels more honest. It tells you that the universe is not on your side. It tells you that systems are often cruel and irrational. It tells you that even the greatest heroes can fail, and that their dreams can be twisted into nightmares. And yet, within that meaningless, hostile cosmos, it still presents stories of profound meaning. A space marine's sacrifice matters. A guardsman's last stand matters. The Emperor's vigil matters. The setting doesn't pretend things are okay, but it insists that what you do in the face of that awfulness has weight. For an audience that might be tired of false optimism, this brutal honesty is a relief. It validates the feeling that existence can be a terrible, grinding struggle, while still insisting that the struggle itself is where you find your purpose. We aren't drawn to the grim darkness in spite of its horror. We're drawn to it because of it. It's a universe that doesn't lie to us about the dark, and for that, we can't look away. And that brings us to the final, most uncomfortable truth of this entire list. So many of these fates weren't just inflicted. They were chosen. The World Eaters looked at the butcher's nails, saw the agony it caused their father, and said, "Give it to me too." They chose it out of a desperate, misguided love, a need to share the burden of their broken Primarch. And that love became the engine of their own mental destruction, a slow, grinding erasure of self that they willingly installed in their own skulls. The thousands of Chaos champions who ended up as gibbering spawn didn't just stumble into it. They walked the path of damnation step by step, accepting every gift, every mutation, believing it was the price of ascension. They chose ambition, and their reward was to become a mindless testament to its failure. And then there's the Emperor, the ultimate example. 10,000 years ago, he could have chosen to die. He could have let his spirit dissolve into the warp, finally free from the pain of his mortal wounds. But he chose the throne. He chose to endure, to suffer for the sake of a species that would go on to misunderstand and corrupt everything he ever stood for. His fate is the worst on this list precisely because it is an active, continuous choice to suffer for a purpose that has become a perversion of itself. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. What ambitions, what duties, what loves are we pursuing that might be leading us to our own personal golden throne? Of course, not every fate is chosen. For every World Eater who accepted the nails, there are 1,000,000 souls who were simply processed by the machine. The Imperium's penal codes, the Adeptus Mechanicus's insatiable need for labor, the Inquisition's cold-blooded calculus, these systems create their own horrors. They turn citizens into servitors for the crime of being in debt. They condemn psychers to fuel the Astronomicon because they were born with a gift they didn't ask for. These are fates imposed by vast, uncaring institutions. And it's here that 40K holds up its darkest mirror. It makes you look at the systems we all exist within and ask what kind of suffering they produce as a matter of routine, what kind of moral compromises we accept just by participating. This brings us to the final, crucial question. What, if anything, would make these fates bearable? And I think the answer is meaning. Look at the lower fates on this list. A penal legionnaire is told their service is a path to redemption. An archoflagellant is taught that their agony is holy, a penance that purifies their soul. These are twisted, monstrous rationalizations, but they are rationalizations. They provide a framework, a purpose, however horrific, for the suffering. The truly worst fates, the ones at the very top of the pyramid, are those that systematically strip away even that dark comfort. A homunculus victim suffers for art, for an alien's aesthetic whim. A demon host suffers simply because they are a vessel, a cage. Their torment has no higher purpose for them. It is fundamentally meaningless. The 40K universe, for all its over-the-top grimdark spectacle, is a massive philosophical laboratory asking one question over and over again. What truly matters when everything is terrible? And the answer it seems to provide, again and again, is that purpose, even a terrible one, is the last thing a soul can cling to when everything else has been burned away. We began this journey with a simple, almost cliché statement. In the grim darkness of the far future, death is a kindness. 10 fates later, I think we can all agree that isn't just a catchy tagline. It is the single most fundamental, literal truth of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The dead are the lucky ones. The truly damned are those who are denied that final, simple mercy. We've seen how this cosmic cruelty operates on a sliding scale. At the bottom of our list was the penal legionnaire, a fate so horrific it's almost unimaginable. Yet it ranks 10th because eventually a stray bullet or an orc chopper offers an exit. The arco-flagellant's body will eventually burn out. Even the victim of a homunculus, after centuries of artistic torment, might find release through their master's boredom or a lucky Kabbalite raid. Their suffering is indefinite, but not necessarily infinite. But as we climbed the ladder, that possibility of an ending was systematically stripped away. The butcher's nails don't just kill you, they erase you while you watch. The chaos spawn might trap your consciousness in a prison of flesh for millennia. The daemon host binds you to an eternal tormentor, your own mind becoming a cage you share with a monster. And at the absolute apex, we have the emperor, whose suffering is not only eternal and absolute, but is also the very foundation upon which the Imperium rests. His agony is structural. Think back to the image we started with, the one that likely brought you here. That single space marine, a demigod of war, suspended in glowing blue stasis. His face is locked in a snarl of eternal, impotent rage. He is a being of unimaginable power, designed for glorious battle, yet he is frozen, unable to move, unable to fight, unable to die. He is conscious, aware of every passing second of his paralysis. That image isn't just one fate, it's the perfect metaphor for all of them. It is the 40K universe in miniature. It is the story of tremendous power rendered helpless, of immense will rendered purposeless, of a vast consciousness reduced to nothing more than a witness to its own unending nightmare. Now, it's easy to step back and say, this is all just fiction, it's absurd, over-the-top, edgy fantasy, and you'd be right. But the reason these concepts resonate so deeply, the reason millions of us are drawn to this darkness, is because the fears they explore are not fictional. The fear of losing control over your own body, the fear of having your identity, your memories, your very selfhood stripped away piece by piece. The fear of being trapped, isolated, and unheard. And the ultimate fear, suffering that has no purpose and no end. 40K takes these genuine, primal human anxieties and dials them up to a galactic, mythological scale. It lets us confront these horrors from the safety of our screens, to process them through the lens of giant, chainsaw-wielding super soldiers. And in the end, that's the beautiful, terrible appeal of this universe. It is a portrait of hell, meticulously detailed and relentlessly bleak. And that's exactly why it's so fascinating. It doesn't lie to you. It doesn't promise a happy ending. It tells you that the best you can hope for is a meaningful death, because the alternatives are so much worse.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And somehow, that endless, hopeless war has captured our imaginations and refuses to let go. So remember, next time you're having a particularly bad day, just take a deep breath and be grateful. At least you're not a servitor. Probably.